Chapter 1909. Of course, Milo minded it. After all, it would not be easy for them to communicate with each other when there was another person around. However, he had seen Amy's rule of sharing tables in Randy's and Derek's articles. It was one of Amy's characteristics, so he naturally had no reason to reject it. Moreover, this young man had a pleasant conversation with him earlier and answered many of his questions. He also had the thought of making friends with him. Hence, he nodded with a smile and said, "Of course. Please take a seat." "Thank you." Randy sat down with a smile. He looked at the two of them with a smile and said, "My name is Randy. May I know how to address the two of you? What business are you doing in Chaos City?" Randy, Milo, and Garland were taken aback at the same time. They looked at each other with a strange expression. Their purpose for coming today was to expose fraud. Other than this restaurant, half of it was because of Randy and Derek. However, they did not expect to meet the real deal here, and even sit at the same table. They could not help but feel a little awkward. Seeing that the two of them did not answer, Randy smiled and said, "It's hard to say? Forget it then. Don't mind it. It's fate that we met. I just want to leave my name so that we can meet again in the future." "Why would I? I'm Lomai, and this is my brother, Garland. We are fur merchants." Milo laughed heartily and winked at Garland. Yes. The two of us are fur merchants." Garland understood tacitly and nodded cooperatively. Milo's reputation was really a little bad. If they were recognized on the spot, they might be chased out. This kind of thing happened from time to time in Rodu. "So, you're fur merchants." When I was traveling around the continent in the past, I would often hitch a ride with a caravan. Fur merchants are the easiest to deal with. Randy smiled, and then looked at the two of them puzzledly. "But shouldn't fur merchants be going to the orc tribes to collect their goods during this season? Why are you guys in Chaos City?" Milo was stunned. Being a fur merchant was a profession that he made up casually. He did not expect Randy to know about it. "We've already received the goods for this year. We've specially shipped them to Chaos City to hand them over to an old buyer," Garland quickly said. Randy was enlightened. "So that's the case. Then, we have to try Mamie's delicacies in Chaos City these few days. We won't be able to eat them when we return to Rodu." Milo and Garland looked at each other and smiled, relieved. Then another orc sat down at Milo's table. Sharing tables at Amy's was a common practice. Milo and Garland were surprised to see elves, demons, orcs, and goblins sitting at the next table. The guests of the four races sat at the same table, and the atmosphere was unexpectedly harmonious. Occasionally, there would be conversations, and then they would order separately. Such a miraculous sight could not be seen anywhere else. Not to mention Rodu, even in the other restaurants in Chaos City, there was no sight of foreign races sharing tables like this. This restaurant was indeed special. "This is the menu. It's your first time here, so take a look at the menu first." Randy pushed the menu in front of the two of them and reminded, "Oh, yes. You can look at the back of the menu. There are some restaurant rules. Take a look first. Don't break the restaurant's rules." "All right." Milo nodded. He flipped the menu and looked at the restaurant rules that were neatly written at the back. Usually, when customers chose a restaurant, they would have certain requirements for the restaurant. However, this restaurant was so strange that it actually set rules for its customers. However, after Milo read through all these rules, his impression of them changed greatly. These rules were very detailed and were indeed set up for the customers. However, abiding by these rules would not harm the customer's interests. Instead, it would create a quiet and pleasant dining environment for the customers. Just like now, in Rodu's restaurant, once it was dinner time, even if one hid in a private room, they would not be able to block out the noise coming from all around. Those drunkards who used their voices to make their presence known were a headache, but there was nothing they could do. But here, even the fierce-looking demons spoke in a gentle and soft voice. Milo's impression of this restaurant increased a little. Just the dining environment and atmosphere alone made this restaurant better than all the restaurants he had been to before. Then, he flipped open the menu and looked at the exquisite pictures. Milo's eyes lit up. He did not know what kind of technology was used to reproduce these pictures. They looked very colorful, just like real food. These pictures should be schematics, right? The kind that doesn't match the real thing? Milo asked Randy. They do not match the real thing. Milo nodded. Indeed, Milo was deep in thought. This was just a trick that merchants often used. The real thing looks better than this. Flat pictures are not enough to express their attractiveness, Randy said with a smile. Milo glanced at Randy. He wondered if this guy had become this restaurant hired agent. Randy came over to take a look and muttered, "This mapo tofu looks very appetizing. Seems like I have to order a separate serving of rice, 2 rugiamos, and a serving of red braised pork." Milo also looked at the menu again. Other than the amazement brought by the pictures, the prices of the dishes on the menu were a little shocking. The cheapest dish, the octopus balls, cost 40 copper coins each. All the other dishes cost more than 3 digits. The spicy grilled fish cost more than 1,000, while the Buddha jumps over the wall soup cost an astonishing 10,000 copper coins. Of course, there were restaurants in Rodu that were even more expensive than this, and there were also dishes that were even more shocking than the Buddha jumps over the wall. Furthermore, they already knew before coming and had some expectations for this price. Milo looked at Garland and asked, "How do we order?" Originally, they had planned to order all the dishes on the menu. However, after looking at the menu, they realized that their budget was only enough to order half of the dishes. However, after looking at the menu just now, the restaurant had a rule that customers had to order in moderation. They could not be extravagant. Hence, now, they had to order according to 2 people's appetites. They had to order something suitable. Garland looked at Milo and said with a smile, "Of course, it's a combination of meat and vegetables. It's nutritious and healthy." Milo was enlightened and looked at Garland with some admiration. Indeed, the older the ginger, the spicier it was. Randy looked at Garland seriously and said, "Brother Garland, you should order the Buddha jumps over the wall. It's a professional treatment for baldness. 1 serving will be effective, and 3 servings will let you have beautiful hair again." Treatment for baldness? Garland's eyes lit up. He had been worried about balding for a long time because of his hair loss. As the saying went, the more he worried, the more it would fall. The more it fell, the more worried he would become. Seeing that his hair was almost all gone, he had also turned from a handsome uncle to a bald uncle. Isn't that so? Mamie's is almost becoming a baldness prevention hospital. There are countless customers who come to treat baldness every day. Randy pointed at the table diagonally behind them without batting an eyelid and whispered, "Look at that table over there. It's a gathering of veteran baldness friends. Most of them are here to treat baldness together." Garland turned his head to take a look. From his position, he could only see 4 shiny skulls. However, according to his experience, this was already the late stage of baldness. Generally, it was the stage where people had given up on themselves. Moreover, they would start to talk about the benefits of being bald. Things like it was cooler and it was convenient to wash their hair and so on. "This can be treated?" Garland asked doubtfully. "Just 3 sessions, and I guarantee that they will have beautiful black hair again. If it doesn't work, feel free to look for Mr. Mac." Randy nodded with a serious expression. "Then I'll order 1 too," Garland said without hesitation. "Cough, cough. Brother, the money we brought might not be enough." Milo coughed dryly. He felt that Garland had fallen into Randy's marketing trap. Garland suddenly realized that their budget was not enough for him to order the Buddha jumps over the wall. 10,000 copper coins to buy a head of beautiful hair. "It's not a dream to return to being 20 years old," Randy said leisurely. "It's okay. I still have some. I'll order this Buddha jumps over the wall." Garland could not help but take out his money bag. Chapter 1910. Milo now seriously suspected that Randy had become this restaurant's top salesman. From the moment they started talking, they had fallen into his trap. It could attack Garland's bald spot and make him lose his rationality as an intellectual by intensifying the pain caused by baldness and verifying it on the spot. 10,000 copper coins. That was Garland's salary for half a month. Even in Rodu, the cost of a meal rarely exceeded 10,000 copper coins. But now, he had ordered a Buddha jumps over the wall that cost 10,000 copper coins. All these years, you've been worried about your rising hairline. You've eaten and used a lot of things. Baldness is not an illness, it's a disability. There's no cure for it. Milo made a final attempt. Your point of view is quite interesting. Randy smiled. But even if it's a disability, Mr. Mac can cure you with a bowl of soup. Milo glanced at Randy and thought to himself that he had met an expert. Bye. If I can let my hair grow out before I go back and let my wife see me 20 years younger, it will definitely be very interesting. Garland decided. Milo didn't say anything else. After all, Garland was the chief editor of Whole Foods and Beauty. He was a proper middle-class person. What was wrong with contributing a little money for hair? If there was no effect, then they would have one more material. Randy couldn't escape from false advertising. Shocking. The meat-loving gourmet is actually promoting hair loss prevention products for a restaurant. Such a title was already scheduled to be the first hot article in next month's Whole Foods and Beauty magazine. To be honest, Milo was a little disappointed from the time he queued until now. He had accumulated his firepower all the way, but when he came to Mamie's, he realized that he had nothing to say. As an expert in the world of finding fault, he had a pair of eyes that could find fault and a mouth that could use the most simple words to say the most hurtful words. But he just had to come across a restaurant that made him speechless and unable to say any harsh words. Even his tone had become gentler because of the environment and rules. These are all illusory things. Whether it's a mule or a horse, we'll know when it's served. Milo placed his order and waited for the dishes to be served. The dishes he ordered were very simple, a combination of meat and vegetables. They were all dishes that Randy and Derek had written about in the vegetarian and carnivorous books. Since he was here to pick a fight, as a professional, of course, he couldn't make things up. This wasn't his style. Accurate sniping and head-on attacks were his specialty. While waiting for the dishes to be served, Milo turned his head and looked in the direction of the kitchen, but his eyes widened a little. From his position, he could clearly see the inside of the kitchen through the glass window. It was completely different from the kitchens he had seen before. It was clean and bright, and the spacious space was almost half the size of the dining room. He could only see part of the operating table. At this moment, Meg was like a great general overseeing the army. The pot on the stove was his right-hand man, and the spatula in his hand was his command flag and weapon. He could be seen walking between several stoves, cooking several different kinds of food at the same time. He even had the time to flip the hundreds of skewers on the grill beside him, using a brush to brush them with oil and various sauces. It was very exaggerated, you know? Other people's kitchens were equipped with a few chefs, and there were also a few helpers and apprentices waiting by their side. Not to mention that the work was in full swing, the efficiency was not necessarily high. However, Mag was doing all the work related to cooking alone, including taking out the wok and serving the dishes. Yet, people felt that he was doing it with ease, and even felt that he could add 2 more woks worth of dishes. As for efficiency, Milo, who was sitting by the kitchen door, had already seen the dishes floating past him and then landing in front of the guests who had ordered the dishes. It seems that Miss Barbara has returned. This is the first time you've seen a spatial magician serving dishes, right? Randy said with a smile. It's the first time. Milo nodded. He made a rough assessment in his mind. The speed of serving dishes was incredible. For a medium-sized restaurant, this speed of serving dishes required an overloaded high-end kitchen. And now, there was only one person in the kitchen cooking leisurely. This boss is a monster, right? Milo swallowed his saliva. This casual operation had already surpassed all the chefs in the world. At this level, Mr. Mac actually restrained himself. 2 days ago, he went to the gourmet conference and set up a stall. Thousands of people lined up, and he did it alone. When I was in line, I felt that there were after-images of his hands. The efficiency of serving dishes was 10 times that of the stall with more than a dozen people next door. Randy turned his head to look in the direction of the kitchen and said with a smile, "Isn't this too casual? I can't feel the soul," Garland complained. Randy chuckled. "I feel that this is more soulful than those chefs who repeat the same actions with a dull face. Being relaxed and casual is absolute confidence in one's culinary skills." And from Mr. Mac's focused expression, I can see that he enjoys and loves what he's doing. Garland raised his eyebrows. A person with a pen was indeed different. His words made him unable to refute, and he could only look at Milo for help. Yes, I haven't seen this kind of attitude towards cooking in a long time. Milo nodded in agreement. He looked at Meg with the same admiration. Garland was speechless. They were here to find fault this time, to uncover the scam of carnivore and vegetarianism. But now, Milo seemed to be a little out of it. Although it was his usual style to hit hard online and be submissive offline, praise was something that he rarely received. Here are your dishes. Please enjoy. Dishes floated out of the kitchen and then landed lightly in front of them. At the same time, a crisp voice sounded in their ears. Although they had already seen the means of this spatial mage to serve dishes, Milo and Garland were still a little amazed. They felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction when they thought of the mysterious and rare spatial mage serving them. However, Milo's gaze was quickly attracted by the dishes in front of him. On the long plate in front of him, there was a fish that was split in the middle. The golden red soup was poured over the fish. It was crystal clear and seeped perfectly into the meat of the fish through the crisscrossing cuts. The tempting fish fragrance rose together with the steam, making Milo's throat roll. This taste was too tempting. Garland's expression was similar, but he still asked in a low voice, "We don't seem to have ordered any fish, right? This is not fish. This is eggplant with garlic sauce." Randy glanced at it and said with a smile, "This is eggplant with garlic sauce." Milo and Garland were both shocked. They came closer and looked carefully for a while before realizing that it was indeed not fish on the plate, but eggplant that had been cut into the shape of a fish. It was cut with a knife and fried until golden yellow. If one did not look carefully, it was no different from a fish. Such knife skills and craftsmanship made an extremely ordinary purple eggplant be reborn in an instant. Chapter 1911. The eggplant with garlic sauce had caused quite a stir in the culinary world due to Derek's beautiful article. There were even chefs in Rodu who had replicated the eggplant according to Derek's description, but the eggplant they made tasted very strange, and very few chefs were able to make eggplants as soft as fish. Milo had participated in several of the experiments. It was impossible to make eggplant with garlic sauce without fish, so he had always thought that Derek's description was definitely exaggerated. But now, the eggplant with garlic sauce in front of him had perfectly deceived his eyes with its appearance and fragrance, and also gave him a deep slap in the face. And the words that appeared in his mind were exactly what Derek had described. It had to be said that Derek's words were still simple and simple. He had only truthfully recorded the appearance and fragrance of the eggplant with garlic sauce, but it was precisely because of this that it gave people a strong sense of immersion. It was as if they could see the real delicacy in front of them. Milo and Garland looked at each other and saw a trace of awkwardness in each other's eyes. The appearance matched, but as for whether the taste was as magical as described, they would only know after trying it. "Come on, try it." Milo picked up his chopsticks, picked up the eggplant with his chopsticks, and put it into his mouth. The soft eggplant almost melted in his mouth. The sour, spicy, sweet, and salty flavors exploded in his mouth almost at the same time, and his taste buds were instantly activated. Oh, what a wonderful feeling. Every taste was so prominent, blending with each other, yet so harmonious. It was like a gentle trap that made you step into it step by step and sink into it. There was clearly no fish in this eggplant with garlic sauce, and it was not even cooked with fish soup, but it had a wonderful taste that left fish in the dust. How incredible! This was actually a vegetarian dish. After the taste buds experienced a crazy feast of taste, the eggplant was swallowed, and there was a lingering fragrance between his lips and teeth, and the aftertaste was endless. I didn't expect that there would be someone in this world who could cook eggplants so delicious. Such culinary skills and creativity are really amazing, Milo exclaimed as he looked at the eggplant with garlic sauce. He couldn't help but exclaim. After reading Derek's article and tasting the eggplant with garlic sauce, not only was he not disappointed at all, he was even more surprised. Words were not enough to describe the deliciousness of this dish, or it could be said that everyone who tasted this dish had a unique feeling. This eggplant with garlic sauce brought Milo a great surprise. But when he thought of the purpose of their trip, Milo's expression became slightly awkward. After all, they were here with the intention of exposing Amy's true colors. They also wanted to expose Derek and Randy at the same time. But now, he himself had fallen. Garland's expression was even more surprised than Milo's. When he was in Rodu, he and Milo often went out to eat together. They had known each other for more than 10 years, but he had rarely heard Milo praise a certain dish, let alone use the word amazed. Garland picked up the eggplant with a complicated mood and put it into his mouth. Then his eyes lit up, and his expression was no less wonderful than Milo's. After swallowing a mouthful of eggplant and eating a mouthful of rice, Garland nodded and exclaimed, "This eggplant is so fragrant. Not only is it fragrant, but it goes especially well with rice." Milo nodded and ate a mouthful of eggplant and a mouthful of rice with relish. Don't fill your stomach with eggplant with garlic sauce. Isn't a red braised pork delicious? As a carnivore, Randy couldn't help but remind them. When Milo and Garland heard that, they also stared at the red braised pork that Randy had promoted in the previous carnivore forum. The well-balanced streaky pork was cut into long cubes. The fat and the lean were balanced, and the color was bright red. It didn't look greasy at all, but was rather tempting. Milo also had a special liking for meat, but he didn't like pork very much, because the rank odor and greasiness of pork couldn't be handled well by most chefs, not to mention the streaky pork, which was difficult to distinguish between fat and lean. It was the worst part of pork. But this red braised pork had chosen streaky pork as the ingredient and didn't undergo any special treatment. It was just cut into long strips, and even the skin wasn't removed. That was why he had scoffed at Randy's article praising the red braised pork as if the whole world hadn't eaten pork before. But even so, the pork that he usually found greasy now made him want to try it. Then I'll try it. Milo picked up a piece of red braised pork. From the feedback of the chopsticks, this piece of streaky pork was very soft. After getting closer, the skin looked crystal clear and bouncy, and the rich meat aroma rushed to his nose. The meat aroma was rich and special. A lot of spices should have been added, but they blended together perfectly and harmoniously. There was no rank odor, only the richest meat aroma. What spices did the chef use? Milo wondered in his heart, and then put the meat into his mouth and took a bite. The soft pork almost melted in his mouth. The lean meat was crisp and tough, dry, but not dry. The skin was smooth and sticky, and the bite was vague. With a gentle bite, the sweet gravy overflowed from the meat. The taste of the pork was perfectly released at this moment. It was fat, but not greasy, sweet and soft. Milo's eyebrows rose crazily, and the satisfaction and incredulity from the corners of his mouth filled his generous face. There was no rank odor. There was no greasy feeling. There was only a delicacy that made people fall for it. Is this really pork? Why is it completely different from the pork I've eaten? This taste, it's crazy. Milo swallowed the red braised pork, felt the lingering fragrance between his lips and teeth, and began to deeply doubt his life. If the eggplant with garlic sauce brought him a surprise, then the red braised pork brought him a subversion. The subversion of his existing knowledge, the subversion of his so-called experience. After eating only a piece of red braised pork, he already knew that he had lost. He had lost completely. There was no problem with Randy's article. If there was a problem, it should be that he was still too restrained and calm. His article was not enough to really reflect the taste of the red braised pork. It was not inappropriate to call such a chef a genius to be able to turn a piece of streaky pork into such a delicious food. Milo turned his head and glanced at Meg, who was wantonly in the kitchen, with heartfelt admiration in his eyes. Such a chef was probably a real chef with ingenuity. He opened the kitchen so that everyone could see how the food in front of them was made. Between the fire and the smoke, his white clothes were not stained with oil, and he used the most elegant posture to cook the most delicious food. "I think we have failed," Milo looked at Garland and said with a complicated expression. Chapter 19:12. Garland, who tasted a piece of red braised pork, also had mixed feelings. They came with lofty ideals of fighting fraud. On the way, it discussed a lot of ways to fight fraud and even thought of the title of the article. They thought that Whole Foods and Beauty would rise again with this anti-fraud article, stepping on vegetarianism and meat eating to become the #1 food magazine in the universe. But after arriving at Mamie's, everything was completely different from what they had imagined. The eggplant with garlic sauce, which was better than fish, really did exist. The red braised pork made with fat streaky pork was indeed delicious. As a senior food magazine editor-in-chief, his understanding of food was no worse than Milo's. His vision was even higher than Milo's. Mamie's was indeed the most special restaurant he had encountered in his career, or rather, in his entire life. If you didn't create something out of nothing and splash dirty water, you would never be able to write an article to find fault with it. Was a red braised pork not fragrant enough? Or was the eggplant with garlic sauce not enough? The comfortable dining environment, harmonious dining atmosphere, the gentle and appropriate service of the beautiful waitresses, and the Space Magician service were all things that were difficult for ordinary restaurants to do. Such a restaurant, unless you went against your conscience, how could you find fault with it? Milo was right. According to their original intention when they set out, they had failed, and they had failed miserably. It's impossible to fail. Tasting such delicious food is the greatest success. Garland quickly smiled and winked at Milo. Milo was slightly taken aback and immediately understood. Since they had come all the way here, they couldn't fight fraud. Couldn't they change their way of thinking to explore the restaurant? As a person who made a living by writing, this degree of flexibility was a basic quality. With this thought, Milo's mentality immediately changed. From the beginning, he was struggling to find fault with it, to enjoying the food and digging out points that were not written by Derek and Randy. Then, he began a second creation. Of course, his purpose was not to stir up trouble, but to do a verification article. He already had a general idea in his mind. Although the gimmick might be weaker than fighting fraud, it would be a good trending article if he could ride on the popularity of vegetarianism and meat eating plus his own characteristics. Hello, here's your Buddha jumps over the wall. Not long after, Yabamiya walked over with a small cup and placed it in front of Garland. The small cup had a lid, which gave it a certain sense of mystery. Thank you. Garland thanked him and put down the chopsticks in his hand. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at the small cup in front of him with a pious expression. Baldness was a very serious topic, and there was a perfect solution in front of him. He couldn't afford to be disrespectful. Milo also put down his chopsticks and looked expectantly at the quaint and heavy bowl. This dish had never been written by Derek or Randy. Taking a deep breath, Garland reached out and opened the lid of the small cup. Steam rose, bringing with it a faint mist. A rich meaty aroma also blossomed along with it. Milo sniffed carefully. The freshness of the seafood was the most prominent, and the aroma of the meat was equally rich. The aroma of the wild mushrooms softened the aroma of the two, and there was also a faint wine aroma mixed in. There was a clear sense of hierarchy, and the taste of the various ingredients contended with each other. It was hard to fathom, but it also aroused an even stronger curiosity. Gulp. Milo couldn't help but gulp. It was hard to imagine that this was the aroma of a pot of soup. Regardless of whether it had the effect of curing baldness, Milo also wanted to taste a bowl of it just by smelling the fragrance. He wanted to personally taste what kind of taste this soup had, how many ingredients were hidden in it, and what kind of taste it had combined to form. The steam dissipated slightly, and the bowl of thick soup was also revealed. There were various ingredients in the thick soup. Abalone, chicken, shark's fin. They were visibly soft, but they still maintained their original state and didn't fall apart because of the stewing. The soup was thick but not muddy. It looked very tempting. Just by smelling the aroma, I feel like my hair is about to break out of its shell. Garland swallowed his saliva and couldn't wait to pick up the spoon. He scooped up a spoonful of brown soup, blew on it, and then put it into his mouth. The delicious soup slowly seeped into his taste buds. The freshness of the seafood, the mellowness of the meat. The taste of various ingredients appeared one by one, blooming on the tip of his tongue. There was a taste within a taste. The rich meat aroma was so ostentatious but it was meaty but not greasy. It was just right to make people want to take another bite. The soup slowly slid down his throat into his stomach and turned into a warm current. It slowly rose and then gathered at the top of his head. His scalp was slightly numb, and a trace of sweat appeared. There really is a feeling? Garland was surprised and happy. Although his hair didn't grow out immediately, he felt as if something wanted to break out of the top of his head. This feeling was so real. Milo had secretly swallowed a few times and asked Garland, "What's that smell?" "It's the smell of money." Garland nodded with a serious face. Then he scooped up another spoonful of soup and put it into his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and enjoyed the feeling of the delicious soup flowing between his lips and teeth. This bowl of soup subverted all his imaginations about soup. Soup had always been a supporting role on the dining table, either as an appetizer or a supplement after a meal. However, this Buddha jumps over the wall had the aura of an overlord, making all the dishes on the table pale in comparison. He could recognize many of the ingredients in the soup pot. Extremely fresh seafood meant that it was expensive, and precious mountain delicacies meant that it was rare. Just based on these ingredients alone, the Buddha jumps over the wall that cost 10,000 copper coins for a serving was already better than many restaurants in Rodu that relied on gimmicks to raise the price of their dishes. Moreover, the Buddha jumps over the wall had delicacies that they couldn't even dream of. "Let me try it too." Milo couldn't hold it in anymore. He held his chopsticks and stared at the dishes in the small bowl eagerly. "This is medicine. How can you taste it so casually?" Garland picked up the small bowl and moved it in front of him. "I'll just try one mouthful, just one mouthful." Milo's gaze followed the movement of the Buddha jumps over the wall. "Not even one mouthful. Whether my hair can grow out depends on this small bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall. Look, even my head can feel it." Garland reached out his left hand to protect the small bowl and refused to budge an inch. "Stingy." Milo glanced at Garland, who was sweating profusely. He didn't know if his head could really feel it, but he could only pick up a piece of red braised pork and put it into his mouth with some hidden bitterness. The red braised pork is really fragrant. After drinking a few mouthfuls of soup, Garland picked up a piece of crystalline shark's fin. The smooth shark's fin slid into his mouth almost instantly. The shark's fin that was soaked in the soup had a very strange texture and a wonderful taste. It was hard to tell whether it was there or not, but it was also very interesting. Chapter 19:13. After drinking the entire cup of Buddha jumps over the wall soup, there was nothing left. Garland took out the towel that he always brought with him and wiped his sweaty bald head. Then he burped in satisfaction. Carefree. Garland felt that this was the most carefree meal he had eaten in the past 2 years. The Buddha jumps over the wall was the most delicious soup he had ever eaten in his life. Your hair really grew out?" Milo glanced at Garland's head, and his eyes widened. He pointed at his head in surprise. "Really?" Milo was shocked. He reached out and touched his head. The top of his head was bare, but now it felt like there was some fine hair on it. Milo looked closer and nodded. "A little fine hair has grown out. There's a lot of it. I think it'll work." Milo and Garland had known each other for more than 10 years. He had seen his head gradually expand from the hairline to the Mediterranean Sea. In the end, because he looked too much like a kappa, he could only compromise and become bald. This process was irreversible. He had only seen his hair fall off, but he had never seen it grow back. But now his hair had grown back on his bald head, and it was in the bald area in the center. "Don't touch it. It'll be a loss if you touch it bald." Milo slapped Garland's hand away and picked up the bright silver spoon. "Take a look for yourself." Garland held the spoon and looked for an angle for a while. Finally, he saw his shiny bald head in the spoon, as well as the faintly visible hair on his bald head. "This is really fine hair." Good. My bald head is finally going to be reborn." Garland wept with joy. 2 lines of tears fell uncontrollably. He looked like a 60-year-old baby. Meg, who was in the kitchen, looked out and smiled. The joy of being a gourmet was so boring. "I told you I didn't lie to you," Randy said with a smile. He had finished the mapo tofu, 2 bowls of rice, 2 rugiamos, and not a piece of braised pork left. Garland was overjoyed. He patted Randy on the shoulder and said, "Little brother Randy, you are really my benefactor. If Cardhill doesn't treat you well in the future, you can come to me. I'll cover you." Hmm? Randy looked at Garland with some confusion. Cardhill was the chief editor of Carnivore. He was also the scary guy who urged him to update every day and sent him a 2-meter-long blade. However, he had just met these two, and he had never said that he was a gourmet. How did Garland know about Cardhill? And he wanted him to follow him? Milo kicked Garland under the table and signaled him to pay attention to his words with his eyes. Garland quickly realized that she had gotten carried away and blurted out some big words. She quickly changed the topic and said with a smile, "Aren't you a carnivorous gourmet? My house was actually right next to the Carnivorous magazine. Usually I would meet Cahill, that big fatty, when I was having breakfast. The guy is very stingy. He's not a good person, and he likes to rush you. So, I'm afraid that you'll suffer. If you really can't stand it, you can come with me." "I see. So you know Cardhill." Randy smiled and shook his head. "Thank you for your kindness, brother. However, being a gourmet isn't my main occupation anymore. It's just something I do out of interest." Milo and Garland looked at Garland with some surprise. "Aren't you on the rise now? Why don't you write about Carnivore?" Milo couldn't help but ask. "Writing is so tiring. It's precarious. You're urged to write every day and have blades sent to you from time to time. You rack your brains to write it, but you're still criticized for being too short. Who are you looking down on? Who is short? You be the judge. Who is short? Although it is a little short, I have a long time. I've been doing this for so many years, right?" Randy sighed. Milo also sighed when he heard this. Who could say otherwise? Even though he attacked those merchants with heavy fists, he often looked at those heavy mailboxes and could only call them trash collectors. Fortunately, he had a good mentality. He relied on selling blades to get through the most difficult days. Sometimes, when he saw blades, he felt a sense of familiarity. "So, I have changed to collecting rent now. There's a woman who is pestering me. She stuffed a lot of keys into my hands and asked me to collect rent for her. She was unhappy when I refused." Randy lifted the corner of his shirt and revealed a lot of keys. He sighed. "Now I know that the lives of the rich are indeed simple and boring." Milo. Garland. "I am done eating. I'm going to collect rent again. I have to go back tonight and pay the public ration. Goodbye, brothers." Randy got up, paid the bill, and left, leaving the two of them in a mess in the wind, saying the toughest words and eating the softest rice. This is indeed a talent. Garland smacked her lips. "Let's just be sour." Milo looked at Randy's departing figure. He didn't want to work hard anymore. "Let's go. We have gained a lot today. We didn't come in vain." Garland got up and paid the bill. "Are we going back just like that?" Milo asked Garland after they walked out of the door. "Of course not. I still have to eat 2 more courses of Buddha jumps over the wall." Garland shook her head and smiled. "We are out for 3 days this time. Wouldn't it be a waste to go back in one day? Of course, we have to know more about this restaurant. Is our budget enough?" Milo glanced at her from the corner of his eyes. "When it comes to budget, there will always be enough." Garland didn't think much of it. Moreover, as long as we can write a really popular article, the boss will definitely reimburse us when we go back. We can just eat as much as we want. Then I am very much in favor of working for a few more days. It would be best if we can understand this restaurant from morning to night." Milo nodded. "Are we going back to the hotel now?" "No, we're going around. I want to wait for Amy's to close before talking to the restaurant owner." Garland shook her head. "Talk about what?" Garland smiled and said, "Since we can't find fault with the article this time, it would be best if we can get the story behind the food. That way, we can distinguish ourselves from vegetarianism and meat eating. Otherwise, what difference would we be from those small magazines with no goals? They would just imitate and plagiarize like a swarm of bees. In the end, we can only drink the water used to wash our feet." Milo thought for a while and nodded. In terms of content control, Garland had a firm grasp. "I think that hot pot looks good. Why don't we try it tomorrow?" Milo's gaze was quickly attracted by the barbecue area next door. He looked at the demon who was eating while spitting fire. It was funny and interesting. It looked very worth a try. Chapter 1914. After the busy night's business ended, the girls returned to their dormitory. Meg, who was about to close the door, saw Milo and Garland standing outside. He remembered that these two had already had dinner and were waiting outside now. They must be waiting for him. These two were just ordinary people, so Meg was not in a hurry to close the door. "Hello, boss. May I have a word with you?" Garland stepped forward and smiled at Meg. "I am Garland, the editor-in-chief of Whole Foods and Beauty magazine. I tasted your food today, and I was amazed. I would very much like to communicate with you." Whole Foods and Beauty. Meg frowned slightly. He had some impression of this magazine. He had browsed through the top magazines on the Northern continent before, and Whole Foods and Beauty was among them. What left a deep impression on him was not the magazine itself, but a gourmet named Milo. He was good at satire literature and used his poisonous tongue to diss all the big businesses. He was quite special in the gourmet articles. Of course, it was mainly because he reminded Meg of himself in the past. What a shameful past. However, compared to him, this little brother's skills were still a little lacking. His choice of words was obviously a little restrained. He was not at the level where he could control his words freely and was not free and unrestrained. Anyway, he was not as good as him. Moreover, he was thinking that if he had the chance to meet him, he would have to remind him to take it easy. After all, those chefs were mostly petty. If they were not careful, they could be cursed to the alternate world. But chefs, after all, not everyone was a son of Providence like him, transmigrating to a different world, reaping a cute baby, and even being assigned a wife. Only he could encounter such a situation. "Wait, Milo." Meg glanced at the tall, square-faced, middle-aged man standing at the side. When he entered earlier, the omniscient door had popped up his information. His name was Milo. Could he be that little brother? "Hello, I am Milo. I'm a gourmet." Milo saw that Meg was looking at him, so he could only brace himself and greet him. He carefully observed the changes in Meg's expression. It was no secret that he had a bad reputation among the food and beverage industry. "Hello, I'm Meg. It's nice to meet you." Meg smiled and nodded. He felt as if he had met someone of the same trade. He was very pleased that there were people in this world who could earn money while carrying a keyboard. This was such an inclusive world. "Thank you." Milo was flattered. He muttered to himself that there was actually a restaurant owner who liked him. It was really surprising. "What can I do for you?" Meg looked at the two and asked. The two little guys were still waiting for him to tell them a story to coax them to sleep, so he didn't intend to welcome them in. Garland was also aware of Meg's hard work, so she went straight to the point. "You may not know this, but under the publicity of several magazines in the same industry, Amy's and your several dishes have been loved by readers all over the world. After Milo and I tasted them, we were impressed by your cooking skills. We hope to have the opportunity to listen to you tell us the story behind these dishes in our free time. I think this is also what readers want to know. My influence is already so big." Meg looked at Garland in surprise. He knew that some of the restaurant's regular customers were gourmets. Randy, who had just hooked up with a rich woman, was one of them. But he didn't expect that the articles they wrote had already spread Amy's influence to all parts of the Northern continent. "Yes, the charm of delicious food is irresistible. Your Amy's has already been regarded as a holy land in many people's hearts." Milo nodded. Although he had always scoffed at this so-called holy land, this time he very much agreed that Amy's could be promoted as a holy land. Meg looked at the two of them, and his mind spun quickly. Influence meant traffic, and to him, traffic meant fans that could be converted. "In that case, let's talk again after tomorrow's business hours. It's a little late today, and the children need to sleep," Meg said with a smile. "All right, then I won't disturb your rest. See you tomorrow." Garland quickly smiled as he watched the restaurant's door close slowly. Then he gave Milo a high five. "Let's eat all we want tomorrow. We have enough funds. We came to the right place this time." Garland couldn't hide his excitement. Then I won't stand on ceremony." Milo chuckled. He had always been good at taking advantage of the rich. "Father, where's Mother? Isn't she coming back to sleep today?" Amy asked as she sat on a high stool behind the counter, swinging her short legs as she hugged Ugly Duckling, who was already asleep, and stood at the side and also looked at Meg. "She might have something else to do today, and will be home later." Amy and could go to sleep first. Okay? Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded obediently and slid down from the high stool. Come on, let's go upstairs. Meg brought the two little fellows upstairs and arranged for them to wash up first. When the two little fellows changed into their pajamas and lay on the bed, he started to tell them bedtime stories. What kind of story do you want to hear today? Meg asked the two little fellows as he sat on the bed and looked at them with anticipation. Amy raised her hand and said, I want to hear the story of the prince and the princess, and nodded as well. You're so young, and you already know about the prince and the princess. That's not good. Meg stroked his chin. Most of the princes in fairy tales were arrogant and lascivious. For example, the prince who had designs on the unconscious Snow White, or the prince who was lustful and took the boots to look for Cinderella all over the world, or the prince who was blind and couldn't see the mermaid, and was even more of a jerk than Hong Shui-hsien. He had to give the two little girls the right values at the right age. He couldn't let them indulge in such unequal stories. Let's not talk about the prince and the princess today. Let's talk about the story of the pony crossing the river, okay? Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded and immediately asked curiously, why did the pony cross the river? It started from a stable. In this stable lived a mare and a beautiful pony. One day, the mare said to the pony, You've grown up. Can you do something for your mother? The pony jumped up and down and said, Why not? I'm very willing to do something for you. The mare. Meg told the story in a gentle voice, and the two little fellows listened very seriously. The pony crossed the river. It turned out that the river was not as shallow as Old Cow said, and it was not as deep as Squirrel said. Meg ended the story, but the two little fellows continued to stare at him, not wearing any pajamas. The silence lasted for a while. And then, Amy couldn't help but ask. Then, the pony crossed the river, Meg answered instinctively. So, the pony only crossed the river, and it became a story, and then it tried to trick us into sleeping? Amy blinked. Meg muttered to himself. He realized that the little fellows were getting harder and harder to take care of. He could only imitate the tone of a primary school teacher and say, So, what does this story tell us? You must learn to swim. That way, crossing the river will not become a story to trick children into sleeping, Amy said with a serious face. Chapter 19:15. The night was getting late. In the city lord's castle of Chaos City, the meeting hall was brightly lit, and the various representatives looked very serious. Everyone had already gone to that cave together and saw the destroyed seal and the ruins left behind by a fierce battle. They could confirm that a devil had broken free from the seal and was missing. Furthermore, Rankster must have had a battle with that devil, but the outcome was unknown. His corpse was not found at the scene. This was undoubtedly very bad news. Everyone had already seen how scary the devil was. Even 10th-tier powerhouses couldn't kill it. If it wasn't for Alex summoning the lightning and the spell formation masters from the Moon Nation helping to repair the seal spell formation, the Great Old One in the Thunderstorm Mountains would have already caused harm to the human world. But now that a devil had broken free from the seal and was missing, it had undoubtedly become the most unstable factor on the Norland continent. An uncontrollable existence was undoubtedly the most dangerous. The tragedy of the Urba tribe was still in everyone's memory. No one wanted their tribe to suffer the same tragedy. Douglas broke the silence. We have to find it as soon as possible. Otherwise, no one will be able to live in peace. The problem now is how are we going to find it? Irina looked at him. Rankster is from your Frost Dragon tribe. He's the only one who knows where the devil is now. We have lost contact with Rankster for 3 years. I don't know where to find him now. Douglas shook his head. This was no longer something that the Frost Dragons could bear. The various representatives spoke one after another, and their emotions became more and more agitated. However, they still couldn't come up with a useful solution. There's no point in arguing. The devil's existence is already a threat to all of us. Facing such a formidable enemy, we can only win if we unite as one. Michael interrupted the argument that was starting to turn into an argument. Michael, what do you suggest? Lewis asked Michael. The various representatives also looked at Michael, who was the host. Michael seriously said, "It's not realistic to look for a hidden devil all over the world. If it's the other half of the devil in the Thunderstorm Mountains, then it's very likely to break the seal and release the devil in the Thunderstorm Mountains. I think we should form a strong enough backup team to be ready to deal with the devil that might appear in the Thunderstorm Mountains. At the same time, we should set up a sealing spell formation near the seal so that we can lure the devil into the spell formation and seal it again if we can't kill it." The various representatives nodded thoughtfully. "We need the spell formation masters from the Moon Nation to rebuild the seal. Why aren't they here? Sean? This is a calamity for all of the races on the Norland continent. She's doing well on the moon, and helping you is an act of kindness. If she doesn't help you, then it's her duty. How shameless are you to think she'd be so thick-skinned as to come here and join in the fun?" Irina looked at Sean with a cold sneer. Sean's expression changed slightly. Displeasure flashed across his eyes. He snorted. "You know, this concerns the safety of all the races on the Norland continent. What's the use of saying such sarcastic words? In my opinion, the biggest threat to the Norland continent now is not a devil, but the million-strong cavalry of the Roth Empire. I would like to ask, if all the races work together to subdue and seal that devil, will the Roth Empire renew the peace treaty at the peace conference?" Irina asked coldly as she looked at Sean. The various representatives kept quiet as they looked between the two of them. After Alex cut off one of Alex's ears and left a must-kill declaration, the feud between Alex and Irina and the royal family of the Roth Empire was brought to the table. Irina and Alex were not good people. From the time Irina came out of seclusion to Alex's reappearance, the people who appeared on that rainy night back then were dying one after another. Now, the only possibility left was the royal family of the Roth Empire that led all of this back then. And the Roth Empire had grown into a colossus in these 100 years. Compared to the scattered races of the giant dragons, the Roth Empire was completely controlled by Andre. Be it the million-strong cavalry or the countless magic casters under the Magus Tower, they already had a scale and power that all the races feared. The peace conference was going to start in a few days' time. Andre's ambition to rule the world was obvious. If the Norland continent were to descend into a racial war again, that missing devil would indeed not be so important anymore. Sean's frown deepened. This question was obviously not something that he could give a clear answer to. Before he came, Andre had not given him a clear answer either. He knew what Andre wanted. He wanted the world to belong to the Roth Empire, and he wanted all the races to bow down to the Roth Empire or even become their slaves. That was what he thought too. However, he could not say such things now. Andre would never allow him to say such a stupid answer. The Roth Empire is willing to join forces with all the races to deal with the devil. This is for the benefit of the Norland continent. As for the peace conference, we have our own demands. Whether we will renew the peace agreement or not is not up to us. It is up to the attitude of all the races, Sean said in a low voice. He was still rather calm despite being surrounded by a group of 10th-tier big shots. "If what Josh said is true, then all of you are dreaming," Lewis scolded mercilessly. Sean glanced at Lewis and calmly said, "The Roth Empire has always been pragmatic. We will not fight a war we are not prepared for, nor will we make demands that we cannot fulfill." The expressions of the various representatives changed slightly. They looked at Sean with a complicated gaze. They had to admit that the 100 years of peace had brought unparalleled prosperity and development to the Roth Empire. Until now, it was still giving them a headache. "Are you too arrogant? Or am I too weak to lift my sword?" At this moment, a mocking voice sounded from outside the meeting hall. Everyone looked in the direction of the door instinctively. The door of the meeting hall opened slowly on both sides. A man wearing a black warrior suit and a mask walked in slowly with a heavy sword on his back. "Alex!" Sean's eyes lit up, and he clenched his fists instinctively. The 10th-tier powerhouse beside him also stared at the door warily and started to get closer to Sean. "I'm here to bring my wife home, and at the same time give the poser a slap in the face. Everyone, do you mind?" Meg's voice still had a tinge of mockery. Chapter 1916. They didn't mind. Of course they didn't mind. If not for their status, many of them would have taught this poser a lesson. The Edward family's posers were each more annoying than the other. However, there was always one thing to overcome another. As long as they met Alex, they would be like frosted eggplants and wouldn't dare to show their faces. The representatives of the other races might have to consider Sean's status and the interests of their own race. But Alex didn't want that. He was a loner now, and an extremely powerful loner. He could do whatever he wanted without any scruples. Josh's ear was cut off just like that, and he even threatened him with death, but the Roth Empire didn't say anything. Therefore, when Sean was putting on a show, Alex appeared here at the right time. Meg was really here to fetch his wife. He had just coaxed the two children to sleep and saw that Irina wasn't back yet. He thought that he should show his face at such an important moment. So he came to the city lord's castle. It was a coincidence that he met Sean putting on a show. However, since he had bumped into him, he naturally couldn't let him put on a show so easily. Although Sean didn't take part in the attack on that rainy night directly back then, he played a part in the military silence. Furthermore, in the past 3 years, he had been sending people to look for him, fearing that he wasn't completely dead. Naturally, he wasn't a good person. Sean, who was targeted by Meg, retracted his fist from the table unnaturally. His eyes were still as dangerous as before, but now there was a hint of enmity. Alex was even more powerful now than he had been back then. And after defeating and sealing the devil, his status in the Roth Empire, and even in the hearts of the people of the entire Norland continent, had risen to an extremely high position. Alex, long time no see. Sean looked at Meg with a smile, as if he had seen an old friend. You don't have to pretend to be familiar with me. You and I are at most enemies. Even if I don't kill you today, I won't welcome you with a smile. Meg sneered mercilessly. The smile on Sean's face froze instantly. Great. The eyebrows of the various representatives gradually relaxed, and they felt much better. Irina also looked at Meg with a smile. She didn't expect that his eloquence was getting better and better. He seemed to have inherited some of her skills. Although the expert beside Sean couldn't hide his anger, he didn't dare to speak rashly. Sean looked at Meg and said, "You may have misunderstood what happened back then, but I'm not in a position to say too much. Now, our common enemy is the devil. I hope you can put aside your old grudges and join forces with us to kill the devil that escaped from the seal or reseal it." He quickly regained his composure. "You might have some misunderstandings about the misunderstanding. You and I both know what happened back then, but I really won't kill you now. It won't be too late to settle the score after the peace talks between the demons and us," Meg said with a smile. Sean's face darkened. "Alex, since you're here, why don't we sit down and discuss a plan? After all, you and Princess Irina discovered this cave. What do you think about this?" Michael said with a smile, interrupting the tense atmosphere. "What Irina said is what I want to say." Meg glanced in Irina's direction and then continued, "I don't know where to find it now, but it's definitely right to set up a new seal spell formation as soon as possible." Michael nodded and said, "In that case, I'll personally visit the princess of the Moon Nation at Mamie's tomorrow. I heard that she has already returned to Mamie's today. In that case, you guys take your time. We'll be taking our leave now." Meg walked over to Irina's side and extended his hand to her. "Let's go." "Okay." Irina's lips curled up slightly, and she reached out to grab Meg's hand and walked out of the door. The various representatives looked on with complex expressions as they disappeared from the conference hall, and all of them were a little resentful. No one had expected to be stuffed with dog food in the middle of such a tense meeting. Sean also heaved a sigh of relief, and he relaxed his tightly clenched fists. He leaned back in his chair gently, and only then did he realize that his clothes were already soaked in sweat. TSK, you're here to take your wife home?" After leaving the city lord's castle, Irina looked at Meg with a smile. "Yes, there's nothing wrong with it." Meg took off his mask and also looked at Irina with a smile, but he didn't let go of her hand. "Where are the two little ones?" "I just coaxed them to sleep, and then I came to pick you up," Meg said honestly. "Well, they did well. Irina nodded. Are you hungry? Meg asked gently. Do you want to eat something? Yes. Irina nodded very frankly and seriously thought about it and said, I want to eat hot pot. Beef rolls, lamb rolls, tripe, pig's brain, and so on. I want all of them. Do you want to eat hot pot now? Yes. I haven't had dinner today, and the box meals at the city lord's castle are terrible. Irina nodded, and her eyes flashed with innocence. Okay, I'll make it for you later. Meg's heart instantly melted, and he agreed with a smile. Irina directly sent the two of them back to the restaurant with a teleportation. Take a seat first. I'll go and prepare the hot pot base. Meg poured a cup of warm water for Irina and turned to go into the kitchen. Meg had left some of the thick bone broth for Irina to drink alone, but it was just right for the hot pot broth now. Not long after, Meg came out of the kitchen with a double-flavored hot pot. Then, he came out with 2 large trays, which were neatly arranged with various dishes and a specially made dipping sauce. Irina's taste was relatively light, and the red soup was slightly spicy. It was the Lady Boss's special version, and Meg made it according to her taste. It was more flavorful than the clear soup, but it would not make her feel uncomfortable. First, put in some beef rolls and lamb rolls, and then cook the vegetables in the soup. Irina took the trays and directly put them into the hot pot, and did not forget to remind Meg, I'll leave the tripe and duck intestines to you. Okay, I promise to make the most delicious tripe and duck intestines for you. Meg smiled and picked up a duck intestine with his long chopsticks and dipped it in and out of the boiling soup. The thinly sliced lamb rolls and beef rolls were cooked very quickly, and Irina dipped them in the dipping sauce one by one and then put them into her mouth. The thinly sliced lamb covered in chili oil was dipped in the dipping sauce to cool down for a short time and then put in her mouth, just enough to release the perfect taste and temperature. Irina's face rippled with a satisfied smile, and her chopsticks picked up slices of beef and lamb rolls, and her mouth made very light and cheerful chewing sounds. As long as she ate fast enough, the lamb and beef in the pot would never get old. Meg dipped the cooked duck intestines in the dipping sauce with his long chopsticks, and then put it in the small bowl in front of Irina. Irina picked up the duck intestines and put them in her mouth, making crisp chewing sounds. Her beautiful eyes curved into a crescent moon as she nodded and said, delicious. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1917. It smells so good. A groggy voice came from the staircase. Irina and Meg, who were eating happily, froze at the same time and turned to look at the staircase. Amy stood at the staircase, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and looked at them with squinted eyes. Ugly Duckling yawned as it missed its footing and rolled down the table. Its head crashed into the corner of the table, and it looked up at Mag with a dumbfounded expression as it called out to Mag, hey, and also poked her head out from behind the staircase and looked curiously at the steaming hot pot on the table with her bright eyes. Father, Mother, you're eating supper behind our backs again, and it's hot pot. Perhaps it was because the aroma was too alluring, but Amy suddenly woke up and said angrily, Air. Meg's smile was a little awkward. Irina picked up a piece of beef roll and smiled at Amy and Anne and said, You're awake. Do you want to come over and eat with us? Sure. Amy's angry face immediately broke into a smile, and she skipped over to take a bite of the beef roll. She chewed happily and seemed to have forgotten all about her anger. She didn't forget to praise, the beef is so delicious. Meg looked at Amy, who was eating happily with a complicated expression. Indeed, the best way to appease a foodie was to stuff her mouth with good food. It was faster and more convenient than explaining anything. And come over and eat something too. Meg waved at Anne and walked over quietly and sat down on the chair beside Meg. Here, cook as you see fit. I'll make 2 dipping sauces for you. Meg gave her a new pair of chopsticks with a smile and got up to walk to the kitchen. Other than the dipping sauces, he still had to add more dishes. Once Amy started eating, her battle prowess was no less than Irina's. Father, I want my dipping sauce to be spicier. This hot pot isn't spicy at all, Amy said to Meg's back. All right. Meg's voice came from the kitchen. As a young contestant who could handle insanely spicy food, this level of spiciness was indeed not enough for Amy. While eating hot pot, Meg went to grill some crayfish and oysters. Although it wasn't healthy to eat supper late at night, the whole family was sitting in front of the hot pot, eating the hot pot and barbecued meat at the same time. The feeling of joy and harmony was really delicious. Amy didn't forget to remind Mag and Irina seriously when she got down from the table after she was full. "I'll let it go this time, but you have to remember to invite me for supper next time," she reminded them seriously. "Okay, next time for sure." Meg nodded with a smile. Meow. Ugly Duckling let go of the lobster's shell and meowed. "Count me in." After getting Amy's permission to let go of itself, Ugly Duckling became rounder and rounder, and, on the other hand, had learned from Irina's elegance and calmness. She put down her chopsticks and waited quietly at the side. However, judging from the slight smile on her face, she still liked this supper very much. "All right, go upstairs and play for a while before you sleep. You just finished eating, so you can't lie on the bed." Meg waved his hand and chased the two little fellows upstairs. The amusement park could help them digest some of the supper. Meanwhile, he started to clear the table. Irina helped Meg clear the table and asked casually, "Sean, what do you plan to do with him?" Meg shook his head. "We can't kill him now. If he dies, it'll be equivalent to directly pushing Josh to the throne. Then we'll kill them together. If we kill them both, Andre will probably start a war that will sweep across the entire continent immediately. Moreover, it'll be a hysterical kind that doesn't care about the consequences. Then we'll kill Andre as well." Meg smiled. "You know, he's the most difficult person to kill in this world. That old tortoise." Irina pursed her lips, but she had to admit that Meg was right. "Young master, what are you looking for?" An old butler asked helplessly as he followed behind Harrison and watched him rummage through the cabinets and clothes scattered all over the floor. "I'm looking for my black jacket. It's the one that makes me look especially skinny." Harrison stuck his head out of the cabinet and said to the old butler, "Do you know where it is?" As a person who was about to go on his first date tomorrow, Harrison was indeed a little nervous. In order to leave a good impression on Georgina, he had set a lot of requirements for his image, including his clothes. However, he was very dissatisfied with his bloated self in the bronze mirror after trying on many clothes. He asked the maid to look for his favorite black jacket for a long time, but he still couldn't find it, so he had to look for it himself. "Are you talking about the black jacket you wore 10 years ago?" the old butler asked. Yes. Do you know where it is?" Harrison's eyes lit up. "You threw it away 9.5 years ago because you couldn't fit it." The old butler shook his head. "You were only 150 kilograms when it was custom made. Even if you kept it until now, you wouldn't be able to fit it. So it's like this." Harrison was a little disappointed. It turned out that the handsome young man in his impression wasn't because of the black jacket, but because he had lost weight back then, too. "Look, this was custom made for you later. When you were 250 kilograms, if you squeeze it a little, this jacket might fit." The old butler found a black jacket in the pile of clothes on the floor. "Come, let's try it." Harrison's interest was reignited. With the help of the old butler, he reluctantly squeezed his huge body into this jacket that clearly did not fit him. This is really a distressing stomach. He managed to put the jacket on. Apart from the fact that he couldn't move his hands, his stomach that was as tight as a jar was also very eye-catching. "Young master, just wear something comfortable. There's no need to make yourself look so pathetic." The butler looked at Harrison. "If the girl likes you, it's definitely not because of your looks, but because of your interesting soul." "That's true." Harrison chuckled, but his expression soon froze. He looked at the old butler and said suspiciously, "I feel like you're scolding me." "Why would I? I watched you grow up. Let's wear this tomorrow. Your soul will look more interesting." The butler found a long shirt with a little duck embroidered on the chest from the pile of clothes. "Young ladies like this kind of fresh style. Isn't that what you said back then?" "All right, then I'll wear this tomorrow." Harrison nodded. He felt that his old butler was quite reliable sometimes. "Is my soul really interesting?" Harrison asked again when the old butler left the room. "They all say that good-looking looks are all the same, but interesting souls weigh 150 kilograms. You fit the criteria very well. The old butler nodded seriously. Chapter 1918. Chaos City was a complicated city. It was a city that stood out from the rest. People from various races came here and built this city of freedom and equality together under the constraints and guidance of a special set of rules. The Roth Empire was still consolidating its centralized feudal dynasty. The Wind Forest gave up its free soul and became more and more like humans. They dug deep caves to guard against the next racial war. The orcs still maintained their nomadic hunting tradition. The demons kept fighting for territory. The giant dragons soared in the sky, but had the strictest racial suppression. Chaos City, on the other hand, kept opening up and innovating. It went from a wasteland and a prison for war criminals to a thriving city in the past 100 years. Milo and Garland got up shortly after dawn. They carried their small bags and walked on the streets of Chaos City. They looked at the breakfast shops that opened one after another. As the steam rose, they saw the smiles on the faces of those who woke up early. This was a lively city. Such a lively city was not common in Rodu. Those who lived at the bottom and could not change their lives no matter how hard they tried. There was no anticipation or passion for life on their faces. But in Chaos City, you could see the smiles on people's faces everywhere. Even if they only bought a pancake from the roadside for 1 copper coin, they could still eat it and feel that it was extraordinarily delicious. Happiness was probably the most charming and attractive aspect of this city. I used to think that this city didn't even have good food, and that the people living here must not be happy. But now it seems that this thinking was too narrow-minded. Milo smiled shamefully. Yes, if I hadn't come here personally, I wouldn't have thought that this city's happiness would be so strong. Garland nodded in agreement. Moreover, there's a restaurant in this city that all foodies in the world envy and yearn for. I'm more curious about what Amy's breakfast will be like now, Milo said with a smile. Today might be a very memorable day in his career. He would be interviewing a restaurant owner for the first time about the story behind the food. In the past, he would always fill in the 10,000-word dirty stories for those bosses. Milo and Garland had arrived early enough, but they did not expect that there were already scattered customers lining up at the entrance of Amy's. In addition, there were also many cleaners gathered at the entrance of the restaurant. It seemed that they were also waiting for food. Will Amy's breakfast prices be lowered? Milo asked the customer, standing in front of him curiously. That customer seemed to have seen through Milo's thoughts and explained with a smile, "The prices on the menu won't change. Boss Mag has been preparing breakfast for the cleaners for a while so that they can have a steaming hot breakfast after working for a few hours." I see. Mr. Mack is really a good person. Milo nodded thoughtfully. With the high price of Mamie's dishes, preparing breakfast for so many cleaners every day was not a small expense. What was even more difficult was that he had to prepare breakfast before opening every day, which would undoubtedly take up his rest time. Not long after, the door of the restaurant opened, and a female employee walked out with a big iron bucket in one hand. She began to distribute the congee with pork and century egg to the cleaners in an orderly manner. The hot steam carried the aroma of the congee with pork and century egg and spread in all directions. It smells so good. Milo's throat rolled as he looked at the cleaners who were carrying large bowls of congee with pork and century egg. He muttered, "I suddenly want to be a cleaner. If it's just you, maybe they won't want you." Garland glanced at him. For breakfast, Milo ordered a bowl of congee with pork and century egg. He also followed the advice of the customer at the same table and ordered a set of soy milk and youtiao. The congee with pork and century egg had refreshed his imagination of porridge. He didn't know what kind of animal had laid the century egg, but it was so delicious when paired with tender lean meat. After a bowl of congee with pork and century egg, he only felt that his whole body had become warm. The combination of youtiao and soy milk had subverted all his imagination of breakfast. The crispy youtiao was crispy and fragrant. It was better than any fried snack. It also had a hint of sweetness. The more he chewed, the more delicious it became. He took another sip of the sweet and delicious soy milk. The texture was much more delicate and soft than milk. After swallowing, his mouth was still full of fragrance. Of course, this was not the ultimate way to eat. He picked up the short strips of youtiao with chopsticks and dipped them into the soy milk. When the youtiao was slightly soft, he immediately picked it up and took a bite. The youtiao, with a hint of tenacity in its softness, was tainted with the sweetness of the soy milk. Whether it was the texture or the layers of taste, it had increased countless times, becoming a brand new delicacy. After drinking the last drop of soy milk in the bowl, Milo put down his chopsticks and couldn't help but praise, "Mr. Mac is really a genius to be able to come up with such a wonderful combination." "I agree with that very much." Garland also put down the bowl, somewhat unsatisfied. "No wonder Randy and the others don't want to leave here. It's not because they don't have goals or ideals, but because they don't want to leave. This is simply heaven." Milo looked in the direction of the kitchen. Meg's body seemed to be exuding a mysterious glow. After the morning service, Milo and Garland were received by Meg. "Is this considered an interview?" Meg said with a smile as he poured a cup of tea for Milo and Garland each. "Speaking of which, this is the first time we've interviewed a chef. If you've read our magazine, you should know that we're always serious and critical when it comes to food," Garland said with a smile. "In that case, I should feel honored." "No, it's our honor to be able to ask Mr. Mac to talk about the story behind food. For breakfast today, we were once again impressed by your exquisite culinary skills and novel and special ideas," Garland quickly said. He didn't want to leave an arrogant impression on Meg. Meg looked at Garland with a smile and said, "Before the interview begins, may I take the liberty to ask about the influence of Whole Foods and Beauty magazine? For example, the number of subscribers to the new issue?" Garland was a little surprised by Meg's question, but he quickly smiled and said, "Whole Foods and Beauty is the leader in the food magazine industry. After decades of development, it has become one of the most influential food magazines on the Northern continent. The number of new issues released every month is tens of thousands of copies, and the radiation affects hundreds of thousands of people, which is equivalent to about 10 million. Even Princess Vanessa of the Roth Empire is a loyal reader of our magazine. She even wrote to me," Milo added with a smile. "She seems to read all kinds of food magazines, and occasionally writes to some gourmets who she thinks might have problems with their livelihood, encouraging them to persevere," Meg said calmly as he glanced at Milo. Garland's gaze was a little shifty as he tried hard not to laugh. "Vanessa said that herself. She had been doing this kind of thing all these years, and occasionally gave some money to these gourmets so that they could get through some difficult times. In this world where entertainment was scarce and information circulation was inconvenient, it was already very good that a food magazine could do this." Meg knew that Garland's so-called radiation of 1 million was definitely a little exaggerated, but the sales of tens of thousands of magazines were real. This meant that as long as he accepted the interview, this interview would appear in the new issue of those readers who bought the magazine. "What do you want to ask?" Meg poured himself a cup of tea, leaned back in his chair, and sat comfortably. "Then can we start with Mr. Meg's culinary experience? Mr. Meg has such amazing culinary skills at such a young age, and keeps creating so many delicacies. You must be born in a family of chefs and have been learning to cook since you were young, right?" Garland asked with a smile. "Not really." Meg shook his head and calmly said, "Being a chef is just a hobby. I haven't learned cooking from anyone, and I don't have any family background of chefs. A few months ago, I felt that I should raise the level of this world's food, so I opened this restaurant." Garland. Milo. The two of them looked at Meg with a somewhat inexplicable gaze. Not bad, big-chested brother. This pretentious act made people not know how to respond. Originally, they thought that Mr. Mac seemed to be easy to get along with, and the interview should be carried out in a relaxed and pleasant atmosphere. They did not expect that as soon as they sat down, Mr. Mac directly laid his cards on the table. Meg looked at the expressions of the two and was a little puzzled. Was he too simple? After all, Garland was a professional chief editor. She quickly realized that Meg's way of speaking made it easier to ignite the topic, so she followed his words and continued. "You said that you want to raise the level of this world's food. What do you mean by that?" Let more people eat real delicacies instead of those ordinary foods. Let those fake delicacies have nowhere to hide. Improve people's ability to appreciate delicacies, and even let every ordinary person learn one or two delicacies that they can cook themselves. Meg smiled slightly. This is my vision, and also my so-called higher level of food. Milo opened his mouth slightly and looked at Meg with eyes full of surprise and appreciation. How could this not be what he thought in his heart? This is really a great and beautiful vision. Garland praised sincerely. As a food lover, she also looked forward to seeing such a grand scene. You have created so many strange and delicious foods. May I ask where your inspiration comes from? You have to know that many of these foods are unheard of. We can't even imagine that they can be cooked like this, such as beggar's chicken wrapped in mud, or tofu pudding made with soybeans. Meg smiled and said, I can only be regarded as a person who stands on the shoulders of wise ancestors, and life is the source of all inspiration. What you don't know doesn't exist, but your knowledge is limited. Chapter 1919. What Meg said was the truth. He wasn't willing to give all the credit to himself. He had merely obtained a recipe that had been optimized by countless seniors and studied and practiced diligently enough. However, when Garland and Milo heard this, they felt that it was much more pretentious. On the surface, Meg seemed to be humble, but from another perspective, it felt like he was mocking those chefs who didn't know how to adapt. Garland glanced at Milo and wanted to know how an old thousand-layer cake would view this paragraph. Milo raised his eyebrows and expressed that this pretentious act was on point. It would definitely infuriate those arrogant chefs and increase the discussion in the magazine. I've tasted the Buddha jumps over the wall that you cooked yesterday. It's so delicious that it's unforgettable. It even made my hair grow out again after being bald for more than 10 years. May I ask how you created such a miraculous delicacy that's both delicious and can grow hair at the same time? You have to know that many of the seafood in this dish are very difficult to obtain in Chaos City. Garland continued to ask a question that he was very curious about. Meg glanced at Garland's head. His bald head was indeed like a forest after the rain, with some fine hair growing out. Judging from his experience, he nodded slightly and said, You still need to eat 2 more courses and rest well at the same time to let it grow back properly. All right. Garland quickly nodded and followed the doctor's instructions. Meg and Garland looked at each other and suddenly realized that something wasn't quite right. Sorry, it's an occupational disease. Meg touched his nose awkwardly. You're a real good doctor, Garland said seriously. As a chef, making delicious food is the most basic pursuit. However, what other effect will appear after the deliciousness is achieved is not something I can control. Meg shook his head. Therefore, the fact that Buddha jumps over the wall can treat baldness was not known when I was researching this dish. It was an unexpected surprise that the customers discovered after this dish was launched. Garland pondered. Perhaps this is the reward for the deliciousness. That's an interesting direction of explanation. Mag smiled too. The interview was carried out in a relaxed atmosphere. The questions that Garland chose were not too tricky, and Meg basically answered everything he knew, making the work of both parties much easier. About an hour later, Garland looked at Meg and thanked him. Thank you very much for accepting our interview and letting us know the stories behind the food. I believe that more people will fall in love with Mamie's and become your fans after watching this interview. You're welcome. Meg smiled. He actually liked the feeling of sharing his success. It felt like acting tough. Oh, this way of saying it is too tacky. It should be sharing happiness. Garland had asked all the questions that he should ask. As the chief editor of a gourmet magazine, he still had his own opinions about chefs. When will this article be published? Meg asked curiously. The article will be published in the new issue at the end of the month, Garland replied with a smile. In fact, the content of a new issue had all been finalized and even handed over to the printing workshop. But Garland changed his mind after the interview. He planned to add the new manuscript written by Milo and this exclusive interview to the new issue and set it as the main article. In the past few months, Total eclipse in American cuisine had not had a good time under the attack of carnivore and vegetarianism. This would be a turnaround battle that would determine the outcome. Meg nodded and changed the topic. Does your magazine have a column that teaches people how to cook? Garland and Milo both looked at Meg with some doubts. It's a column that does gourmet tutorials, Meg explained. Garland understood and shook his head. Not at the moment. You should know that the recipe is the most important thing for a chef. Generally, it is not easily shared with others, let alone published in a widely circulated magazine. Meg nodded slightly. From a chef's point of view, this idea was not difficult to understand. However, it was precisely because of this inherent closed mind that the speed of innovation of gourmet food was extremely slow and the overall level of gourmet food was stagnant. I want to open a gourmet tutorial column in Total Eclipse and American Cuisine. Meg looked at Garland and said seriously, Garland stared blankly for a moment before revealing a look of ecstasy. Even her voice was trembling as she said, You're saying that you want to open a gourmet tutorial column in Whole Food Mart, specifically for gourmet education? Milo also looked at Meg with a look of surprise. He couldn't believe his ears. Yes. Meg nodded. I will publish an easy-to-learn home-cooked recipe in every issue so that readers can learn from the article. Garland quickly calculated the benefits that this would bring to Total Eclipse and American Cuisine. With Mamie's current reputation, if they could get an exclusive tutorial column, then Total Eclipse would become the overlord of the entire gourmet magazine industry, completely crushing vegetarianism and carnivory. If Mr. Meg has such an idea, Total Eclipse will fully cooperate and support your column, and will pay you a generous remuneration. Garland looked at Meg solemnly and said, Meg said quite straightforwardly, Then let's talk about the specific details of the cooperation. The opening of the column is not in a hurry. After your new issue is released this month, you can decide when to publish the gourmet tutorial based on the market feedback. At that time, you can make a preview in the new issue of this month. Maybe you can achieve a better effect. Your proposal is very good. We will implement it. Garland took out a small notebook and wrote it down. Raising expectations was their usual method, but it was the first time they made a preview, but it sounded very feasible. Regarding the gourmet tutorial, Meg and the others talked for another half an hour and basically finalized all the details of the cooperation. Mr. Meg, are you really not willing to sign an exclusive licensing agreement with us? We'll give you the most generous remuneration for your work, and we'll do our best to promote your work. I guarantee that your fame and benefits will be maximized. Garland looked at Meg with anticipation in his eyes. Exclusive means monopoly. My dream is to make no difficult dishes in the world, not to earn a little remuneration. Meg smiled and shook his head. Okay, we respect your wishes. Garland nodded. Although he had some regrets, he did not pursue it further. Mr. Mack, if you have any difficulties in writing, you can write to me. Although I dare not say that I am an expert in this area, I am an old writer who has been writing for more than 10 years. Milo said with a smile. Okay. Meg nodded with a smile, but in his heart he secretly criticized. When it comes to writing manuscripts, you are still a brother among brothers. Chapter 1920. Meg sent Milo and Garland away, put away the tea set, and went to the study on the second floor to start thinking about how to write the first gourmet tutorial. Magazines, as the most widely disseminated paper media in the world, were the simplest and most effective way to expand influence. Although he had recently begun to study how to reduce the production cost of Magic Vision and how to make it smaller and more homely, there was still a long way to go to promote it into an entertainment tool that every household liked. But spending a dozen copper coins to buy a magazine, in addition to being able to read all kinds of gossip in the gourmet world, he could also learn a top gourmet recipe. Wasn't that great? What Meg wanted was not popularity nor influence, but true apprentice fans who could provide him with the power of faith. He wanted to use the good platform of Whole Foods and delicacies to gain more fans and let more people learn to cook from him, achieve the effect of promoting gourmet food, and, at the same time, let him continue to increase his fan base. As for why he refused to sign an exclusive contract, This involved Meg's greater ambition. A top gourmet magazine may have 1 million fans. Then what about 10? Excluding the duplicates, there were at least 5 million fans. And jumping out of the small pool of gourmet magazines, if he cooperated with more influential gossip magazines with a wider audience, he would inevitably be able to reach more fans. He really didn't care about the royalties of the magazine. Doing something was not as easy and pleasant as writing for money. You have to treat today. If you get Mr. Mac, Whole Foods and delicacies will take off. Milo patted Garland's shoulder heavily, and his face could not hide the excitement. It's a pity that we didn't get the exclusive. Garland sighed, but the smile on her face could not be hidden. This was indeed an unexpected surprise. Originally, she thought that being able to interview Meg was already very good, and the next issue would be hot. She did not expect that after the interview, she would even get Meg's gourmet tutorial column, and a promotion and a raise were just around the corner. Speaking of which, Mr. Mac is really a great chef. Ordinary chefs can't wait to hide their recipes and take them to their coffins, but he's willing to share the recipes he created for free. Moreover, he's sharing them with food lovers all over the world in a magazine, Milo praised. Garland also stopped smiling and said with some admiration, yes, he said that he wants to improve the level of food in this world. It's not just a casual remark. He really wants to do something, and he even took out the most precious thing for it. Princess Barbara, may I have a word with you? Michael came to the ice cream shop and found Barbara, who was serving ice cream to children, with a smile. Wait a minute. Barbara handed the ice cream to the children and turned to look at Michael. Is there anything I can help you with? Michael glanced at the children beside him and then looked at Barbara. Why don't we talk outside? Okay. Barbara nodded and followed Michael out of the ice cream shop to a relatively secluded part of the park. I'm sorry to disturb your work, but it's an emergency. I hope Princess Barbara won't blame me, Michael said apologetically as he stood beside the bench. It's okay. Go ahead. Barbara had a good impression of Michael. Princess Barbara is someone who has fought with us, so I won't hide it from you. The devil has appeared again, and it has escaped the seal. Michael went straight to the point. Escaped. Barbara was shocked. She had not completely eliminated the shadow of that devil, and she was really shocked to hear this news. It's not the one at the Thunderstorm Mountains. Alex and Irina found a new seal place under Dragon Island, but the seal has been destroyed, and the great old one sealed inside is also missing. Michael shook his head. In other words, there's a devil right beside us now. Barbara's eyes widened, and she looked around instinctively. Don't worry too much. If it appeared in Chaos City, we would definitely be able to find its tracks very quickly. The biggest problem now is that we can't confirm its location, Michael consoled with a smile. Then, why did you come to look for me, City Lord? Although I'm quite powerful, I still don't have much hope of defeating a devil. Barbara looked at Michael perplexedly. What we're more worried about now is that the devil will go to the Thunderstorm Mountains, destroy the seal there, rescue that octopus monster, and merge with it again. When that happens, we might be facing an invincible opponent. Michael's expression gradually became serious. So, on behalf of Chaos City and all the races on the Norland continent, I would like to request the Moon Nation to help us and help us build another sealing spell formation in the Thunderstorm Mountains. When that devil appears, we can design a way to seal it again. Barbara understood now. She nodded after thinking for a while and said, I will pass these words to my father, but I can't guarantee that the Moon Nation will send someone over. Then, thank you very much, Princess Barbara. Please inform the Moon Nation's king that the Norland continent will remember your kindness and is willing to provide some compensation for your help, Michael said with a smile. All right, Barbara nodded. Outside the city, at the peak of Stone Mountain, Douglas looked at Elizabeth with a pitiful gaze and said, Elizabeth, you should already know that your father might not be around anymore. Come back with me. You're still a frost dragon after all. From the day I was brought away by Alex, I no longer thought that way. Elizabeth looked at Douglas expressionlessly. She did not hide the mockery in her eyes. I will go back, but not now, and not in such a pitiful state. Douglas frowned. He looked at Elizabeth, who was pursing her lips and seemed to see this stubborn dragon youth from back then. Anyone can sit on the frost throne, but it will belong to me eventually. Let Fox go up and sit for a while. I will get back everything I've lost, Elizabeth said coldly. Then she turned and took a step forward. The frost under her feet condensed into a huge snowflake, and she disappeared from the peak of the mountain. Douglas stood alone on the peak for a long time, but a gratified smile appeared on his face. This lass is indeed like rank stir. Since that's the case, I don't have to worry about Lewis poaching her. This child is still a frost dragon after all. Georgina saw the big guy who was stomping his feet under the stone statue with a big red flower in his hand from afar. He was wearing a loose and comfortable robe, which made his tall and round figure look even rounder. However, he looked very comfortable and relaxed. Chapter 1921. Harrison was indeed a little nervous. He already owned 3 factories that belonged to him, and he had been doing business with his father since young. He had a good business mind and experience in dealing with people. However, this was the first time he was going on a one-on-one date with a girl since he was born. His best friend was already carrying his 4th baby, and he was only taking the first step on a date. Take a deep breath. No problem. It's just going to look for food together. I'm good at this. Harrison took a deep breath and then exhaled a puff of white smoke. He then stomped his feet again. He had been standing here for more than an hour. It wasn't that Georgina had stood him up, but that he had come a little earlier than the agreed time. Well, it was only an hour and a half earlier. After all, it was his first time. He was worried that there would be some problems on the way, and if he didn't arrive on time, wouldn't he miss the appointment? When he arrived, he wanted to let himself get used to the environment and rehearse the lines that he had thought of last night, so he didn't stay in the carriage. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. When I see Georgina, I'll strike a handsome pose first, and then use a gentle and domineering tone to give her this flower. Then, I'll be a gentleman and invite her to look for food together. Yes, that's the procedure. First, Harrison paced around and mumbled softly. He looked very serious. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." Just then, a voice sounded from behind Harrison. Ah! Harrison was shocked. He quickly turned around and saw Georgina, who had appeared behind him without him knowing when. He nodded helplessly and said, "Hello, Miss Georgina." Georgina wasn't wearing the black shirt and pants that she had worn yesterday. Instead, she was wearing a grayish-white striped cotton dress with a black leather jacket on the outside. She had a pair of deerskin boots on her feet, and there was a circle of short hair around the edges of her shoes. Her face was small, and the hair that was let down covered half of her face. Her skin was a little pale, but she looked much better than yesterday. There was even a little bit of color on her face. After changing into a new set of clothes, she had the aura of a young girl. Her light purple eyes were also lively and lively. However, after changing out of her loose-fitting cotton-padded clothes, Georgina looked even more petite and thin. It was as if a strong gust of wind could blow her away, which made Harrison's heart ache. Georgina blushed as Harrison stared at her. Her fingers subconsciously grabbed the hem of her skirt, but she was feeling nervous and uneasy. Her cousin had picked out this outfit for her. After hearing that she had a date with Harrison, her cousin had specially brought her out to pick out this outfit and brought her to a hair salon to fix her hair, which hadn't been styled for 3 years. However, she still had no confidence. She knew that she had never been a pretty or cute girl, and she was afraid that Harrison would hate her when he saw her. Now, Georgina wanted to say something to break the silence. "T, this is for you." Harrison held the big red flower with both hands and handed it over nervously. There was only one flower. It was a very common winter plum, but it was very fresh. There was still dew on the petals, as if it had just been plucked. Oh, it had indeed just been plucked. Georgina saw a winter plum tree not far away. It was in full bloom, but the tree was a little tall, so the flowers grew at the top. Thinking of Harrison's clumsy figure and the way he had to tiptoe to pick the flower, a smile appeared on Georgina's face, and she felt a little warm. Moreover, he was holding this flower and standing here for a long time, just to wait for her. What a wonderful feeling. In the past, She was the only one who would foolishly wait on the road for a figure that might pass by. She would give him the things she treasured and cared about the most, only to have her dignity trampled on again and again. And now, someone was actually willing to wait for her here and even give her flowers. I saw it just now when I came. I thought it was very beautiful, so I wanted to pluck one for you, Harrison explained with a smile. However, he didn't say that he was caught on the spot by the patrolling old man in the square when he was plucking the flower. He was only released after paying a fine of 100 copper coins. Thank you. Georgina received the flower, held it to her nose, and sniffed it. A smile bloomed on her face. It smells so good. Harrison immediately smiled like a 300-pound fatty. Georgina looked up at Harrison and asked, "Then, where should we go now?" Let's go look for all the famous snacks that are scattered around Chaos City in Cedar Alley now. Do you remember that snack stall that specializes in selling fried biscuits? They're only the size of copper coin, but they're very crispy and sweet, Harrison said with a smile. Georgina's eyes lit up immediately. She nodded and said, "I know. It's sold by a bald orc uncle. His biscuits are in all kinds of cute shapes, such as rabbits, turtles, and little fish. I loved them when I was young." "Yes, his stall has been moved to Aiden Square now. I'll bring you to him. It's not far ahead," Harrison said as he pointed ahead. "All right." Georgina nodded and turned to walk ahead expectantly. When Georgina turned around, Harrison slapped himself in the face and scolded himself in his heart. "You're the best at thinking, but you're the worst at acting." He didn't do any of the poses that he had planned. He spoke like an idiot and behaved like a teenager who wasn't even 18 yet. His first experience in love was such a failure. He stole a glance at Georgina's side profile and was a little worried that his image in her heart would take a nosedive. Georgina was holding the flower with a smile on her face. Mr. Harrison still made people feel comfortable as usual. Although he was a little nervous, he was still so cute. Even a little duck embroidered on his chest was so cute. He was such a gentle person. The two of them walked forward with their own thoughts. After a while, Georgina suddenly stopped and turned to look at Harrison. "Where's that shop?" Harrison, who had been staring at the girl all the way, suddenly came back to his senses. He looked around and pointed to the back. "It's in that alley. We seem to have walked past it a little." It was a small alley that was sandwiched between two luxurious restaurants. It looked very inconspicuous and was used by the people who lived behind the square to enter and exit. Georgina walked to the entrance of the alley and was greeted by a burst of noise. In the narrow alley, there were 10 odd snack stalls extending along the alley. Many customers were eating in front of the stalls, and the hawkers were calling out their wares. A familiar feeling washed over her. No pop-up window. Chapter 1922. Georgina didn't expect there to be so many food stalls hidden in this small alley, and it was so lively too. Moreover, she didn't even notice when she passed by earlier. "Let's go in and see what's good," Harrison said with a smile. After entering the alley, his confidence began to increase rapidly. He had arrived at his home ground. As an authentic foodie, although his focus had shifted to Amy's recently, he was still an authentic street food expert in Chaos City before that. He had witnessed Cedar Alley's prosperity and its decline. However, the life of a food in an alley might come to an end, but a food's tenacity was much more tenacious than one could imagine. That was because as long as you were unique and delicious enough, you would be able to gain a new group of followers no matter where you went, and attract the old customers to come and look for you. Cedar Alley had come to an end, and the small stalls of varying quality were reshuffled. Those ordinary food stalls left regretfully, while those with good reputations changed places and continued to shine. They were still loved by everyone. The Tazalum family's fried cookies were such an existence. Tazalum was a bald orc uncle. He was tall and burly, and had a rough appearance. His stall was in the middle, but when he stood there, his stall became very eye-catching. "It's really him," Georgina exclaimed in surprise when she saw Tazalum at first glance. "Today's first stop. Let's start with a few cookies." Harrison brought Georgina to Tazalem's stall. 3 rows of golden fried cookies were neatly displayed in a small bamboo basket beside his hand. Each of them was the size of a baby's fist. They were in the shape of little rabbits, little turtles, and little goldfish. They looked very adorable. "Do you want some cookies?" Tazalem asked with a smile, but his hands didn't stop moving at all. He kneaded a small ball of flour in his hand, and it became a little rabbit. Then he slowly fried it in the oil pan. The whole process was very smooth. Georgina nodded. The uncle's words were still the same as when they were young. Even the smile on his face hadn't changed. He still remembered that the first time she came to the stall to buy cookies, she was scared to tears by him. The uncle was at a loss and gave her a little rabbit to coax her. However, she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed that the chubby orc uncle didn't seem to recognize her anymore. Uncle Tazalem, "Miss Georgina used to be a regular guest. Don't you know her?" Harrison said to Tazalem with a smile. He was also a regular guest at Tazalem's house. Hearing that, Tazalem's movements slowed down a little. He stared at Georgina for a while and said in surprise, "Little Rabbit? How did you lose so much weight?" Little Rabbit was Tazalem's unique nickname for Georgina. It was because of that little rabbit. The familiar and warm address made Georgina smile. "Because I haven't eaten your sweet biscuits for a long time, I've become thinner. Come on, have a little rabbit first." Tazalem picked up a little rabbit with his long chopsticks, wrapped it in craft paper, and handed it to Georgina. "Thank you." Georgina took the sweet biscuit, just like the little girl who took the little rabbit back then. Crunch! She bit off the rabbit's head in one bite. The cold sweet biscuit was crispy, but it didn't hurt her teeth at all. The more she chewed, the sweet taste gradually bloomed in her mouth, and there was also a hint of milk fragrance. Georgina's memory seemed to have returned to that long cedar alley. After school, her mother held her little hand and lingered in front of the stalls. A drop of tear fell from the corner of her eye. She looked up and happened to meet Harrison's gaze. "It's so delicious that you want to cry, right? When I finally found Uncle Tazalem's sweet biscuit stall again, I was like this too," Harrison said with a smile. It's delicious." Georgina nodded with a happy smile on her face. She kind of understood that this world wasn't so cold. Some people would never turn back for you. They would only leave you with their backs and hurt. However, some people could always give you warmth and the most gentle part of your heart. Here, there are little rabbits, little turtles, and little goldfish. I packed them for you. It's still the same amount as before. Uncle Tazalem handed a paper bag to Georgina. It was filled with sweet biscuits. "Thank you." Georgina took the paper bag and reached out to touch the money bag. "No need. Next time, when you know Uncle is here, you can come again." Tazalem waved his hand with a smile and said, "Uncle has watched you grow up. I just hope you can become the little chubby baby you used to be." I will do my best." Georgina nodded with a smile. "Then let's eat as we walk. I'll bring you to the next place," Harrison said to Georgina. When he turned around, he placed a silver coin on the chopping board of the stall and winked at Uncle Tazalem, who wanted to say something. The uncle was stunned for a moment. Then, he grinned and gave Harrison a thumbs up. "You eat too," Georgina said with a smile as she handed the open paper bag to Harrison. "All right, thank you." Harrison picked up a little turtle casually, opened his mouth, and popped it into his mouth. He chewed and nodded. It's still the same taste. It hasn't changed after so many years. "Where are we going next?" Georgina looked at Harrison expectantly. "You'll know in a while," Harrison said with a mysterious smile. "Okay." Georgina nodded. She took another sweet biscuit and took a bite. Her smile became even brighter. At the magic potion shop. What amazing nature magic. It can actually make withered grass come back to life. Amy couldn't help but exclaim with her eyes wide open as she watched the grass in the pot that had been roasted by the fire turn green again under Anne's magic. Moreover, it grew quickly and covered the whole pot. Not bad. You're improving very quickly." Cece looked at Anne with satisfaction. She picked up the pot and put it on the ground at the side. Ugly Duckling went forward and sniffed. It bit a tender green grass and ate it carefully. Ugly duckling, is it good? What's the taste? Amy squatted down and asked curiously. Meow. Ugly duckling nodded as it ate the grass. Amy reached out to pluck a blade of grass and put it in her mouth to chew. She nodded and said, It's a little sweet. If Mr. Max sees this, he'll think I'm abusing you. Cece looked at Amy with resignation. She didn't know what to say. Chapter 1923. Meg took some time to go to the gourmet conference. After 3 days of preparation, the venue had become even livelier, and many stalls were surrounded by customers. Meanwhile, the stall of the small seafood shop stood out by itself. It didn't sell any delicacies, and it relied on the big screen at the side to teach. It successfully attracted many customers who lined up to buy octopus tentacles. Meg only watched from afar and didn't disturb Aaliyah and the rest. There were 12 employees at the stall. Aaliyah must have sent 2 more employees to help out in order to cope with the busy business. The handsome elf boy, the beautiful and elegant elf lady, the gentle and reasonable attitude, and the swift movements all made the small seafood shop a beautiful scenery at the gourmet conference. I didn't misjudge him. Meg looked at the efficient and orderly seafood stall and nodded with satisfaction. It seemed like there was no problem for him to be a hands-off shopkeeper. Meanwhile, looking at those housewives who craned their necks and watched the teaching videos seriously, a smile appeared on his face. He liked these people who were passionate about learning. Speaking of which, is this really delicious? Have any sisters tried it before? A young housewife asked curiously. I bought half a kilogram of octopus tentacles yesterday, and then went home to try stir-fried octopus tentacles. Although my skills are a little bad, and I put too much salt, and it was a little burnt, but the taste is really superb. My father and son never dare to eat my dishes, and they actually finished all the burnt side dishes yesterday. This sense of accomplishment is really awesome. Sisters, hurry up and learn, a tall and big young housewife said. Yes, learn a specialty dish. Hubby comes home early from work. A young housewife at the side nodded in agreement. I'm here today to consolidate my learning. I made a few mistakes yesterday, but it's still a few times better than what I usually cook. Today, I took a small notebook to record. Meg passed by and nodded with satisfaction. This kind of tap water is really great. It'll be great if there are more of it. Meg walked around the conference venue and bought a few snacks that looked good. He carried them to the magic potion shop. As soon as he entered, he saw Amy, who was squatting on the ground and eating grass with Ugly Duckling. What's going on? Meg looked at the 2 little fellows. Although this pot of grass was fresh and green, it was still a pot of grass after all. It was one thing for Ugly Duckling to eat a little to help with digestion, but why was Amy eating it as well? Has the food at home become so bad recently? Father, this grass is delicious. Do you want some? Amy looked up at Amy with a blade of grass in her mouth and a freshly plucked stalk of grass in her small hand. She handed it to Meg as if she was presenting a treasure. Meg refused in his heart, but when he saw Amy's expectant gaze, he could only smile and bend down to take the blade of grass from Amy's hand. Then he put it in his mouth and chewed on it. The grass was very fresh and tender. After chewing it open, it was full of juice. It was fresh and sweet with a bit of grassy fragrance. It was actually a little delicious. Is it delicious? Amy asked expectantly. Yes, it's quite delicious. Meg nodded. Seeing Amy, who was about to give him a handful of grass, he hurriedly stopped her. Look, I brought you delicious food. Don't eat this grass first. Although the grass was delicious, it was a little strange for an adult to eat grass with a cat and a child. He hurriedly took out the snacks in his hand as a temptation. As expected, Amy's eyes were immediately attracted by the snacks. She took the big bag of snacks from Meg's hand, thanked him, and ran to a small table at the side. She didn't forget to call an Ugly Duckling over. Cece looked at Meg with resignation and explained, this pot of grass was made by the magic that, and just learned. I didn't expect Ugly Duckling and Amy to like it so much. However, this grass isn't poisonous, and eating a little can help with digestion, so I didn't stop them. It's quite delicious. Even I want to eat some more, let alone the children. Meg smiled as he looked at Anne, who was sitting next to Amy and holding a small chicken drumstick. I didn't expect and to learn magic so quickly. Annie's talent for magic is exceptional, and she has an unimaginable affinity for nature magic. I'm even starting to suspect that she's a wandering child of the Druids. Cece looked at Anne with satisfaction. Then she turned to Meg and whispered, "Mr. Meg, where did you meet Anne?" "I met her in the snowfield. She shouldn't be a Druid's child." Meg shook his head with a smile. He looked at Anne, who was happily gnawing on a chicken drumstick with Amy. "Now, she's my child. Tisich, don't be so smug. I don't envy you anymore." Cece stroked her belly with a motherly smile. "Cece, you're pregnant too?" Meg looked at Cece's belly with surprise. He had vaguely heard that Cece and Lulu had always wanted a child. "Speaking of which, I have to thank Mr. Mac for this," Cece said with a sweet smile. Hey, you can't say that." Meg quickly waved his hand as he looked at the door to see if Lulu had returned. "What are you thinking? I have to thank Mr. Mac for letting Princess Irina treat my illness. That's why I have this child," Cece said with a smile. "You're welcome." Meg shook his head with a smile. He was sincerely happy for this couple who shouldered the burden of reviving the Druids. Amy was gnawing on a chicken drumstick. She took another drumstick and handed it to Meg. She said with a serious expression, "Father, Master said that there have been a lot of bad people in and out of the city recently. You have to eat more and wear more clothes. Only by looking chubby can the bad people be scared of you." That sounds reasonable." Mag received the drumstick with a smile and took a bite. The drumstick was fried pretty well. The outer shell was a little hard, but it was very crispy, and the chicken inside was very tender. It could be considered a pretty good snack that he had gotten at the gourmet conference today. Of course, it would be even better if it was accompanied by a glass of beer. The two children still had to go to class. Meg accompanied them to eat some snacks and then returned to the restaurant. He had to start preparing for the lunch service again. Phyllis was the first to arrive at the restaurant. Meg had decided to teach her how to make tofu in addition to the beef kebabs and black pepper steak. And it was also very early. She had asked Meg to sit in on the class and learn how to make tofu pudding. Meg naturally had no reason to turn down this little chef who didn't like magic, but was very interested in cooking. Beans are a very magical ingredient. Whether it's the delicate and refreshing soy milk or the soft and tender tofu pudding, they all start with a bean. Meg grabbed a handful of soaked soybeans. Meg's class had begun. Chapter 1924. Mag had recently developed the idea of going to the outside world to take a look. Chaos City was, after all, a city with only 100 years of history. Its culinary heritage was very shallow. According to the system, in order to become the god of cookery, in addition to gaining more followers and teaching more people how to cook, he also needed to truly master the art of cooking. He needed to be able to find different ingredients in the other world and create and cook different delicacies. This was a new challenge for Mag, as well as a new journey. The restaurant was pretty good, and so were the customers. A comfortable life made him not want to leave this comfort zone. However, Meg was looking forward to this challenge. He also wanted to really understand this ancient and mysterious continent. He wanted to explore those mysterious and unknown ingredients, taste the delicacies from all over the world, and gain more inspiration. He wanted to create sparks between Earth's delicacies and this world, and then turn them into a gourmet flame to ignite the entire continent. Just the thought of it made Meg feel that it would be very interesting. Of course, there was another very important reason. He needed some time to try to find the sealed grounds of the great old ones that might be scattered all over the Norland continent, and reseal them before they escaped from the seal. He was already starting to like this world, so he couldn't let anyone destroy it. However, before that, he couldn't treat the customers who were used to eating at Amy's too badly. Therefore, he needed a successor. Phyrus, who was hardworking enough, was the first choice. Under the guidance of Mag's golden finger, Phyllis improved very quickly. Meg didn't expect her to be able to learn all the dishes in a short time, but he hoped that she could learn one or two of the more representative dishes in each category. Then, even when he wasn't in the restaurant, the customers would still be able to eat different delicacies. However, Phyrus alone wasn't enough. Harris and Chapman, who had been in Chaos City for a long time, were already on Meg's list of helpers. Both of them were true culinary enthusiasts and had more cooking experience than Phyllis. If they were in the kitchen, Meg would not have to worry about anything. Tofu pudding was a dish that had to be prepared in advance. Mag demonstrated it to Phyrus and Anna, and it was even more detailed than the recipes that he had obtained before. Furthermore, he had added in some of his own personal experiences and insights. This was another improvement that he had made to the almost perfect recipe. Perhaps it was only 1%, but it was still a small improvement. All right, now that the tofu pudding is ready, we just have to wait for it to take shape. Meg flicked their foreheads. Phyllis and Anna, who only knew a little, felt as if something had suddenly rushed into their minds. Like dim lights, the scattered and unclear knowledge points were all lit up at once, and they were all strung together. Do you understand now? Meg smiled at the two of them. Phyllis and Anna nodded at the same time. All right, that's all for today's lesson. Digest and understand what you've learned today, and we'll try again in the afternoon, Meg said with a smile as he clapped his hands to let Phyllis start preparing the ingredients. Outside the restaurant, the customers started to form a long line again. Milo, who was still in high spirits in the morning, had his head lowered and looked a little dejected. Garland stood behind him, and a smile on his face revealed a hint of yawn. Hey, Brother Milo, why do you look so unhappy? Did your wallet get stolen? Randy greeted with a smile as he came over to join the line and happened to be diagonally behind Milo. How did you know? Milo turned around in shock. That's really sad news. Randy shrugged. He had only said it casually. Yes, I thought about it the whole morning, but I still couldn't figure it out. How am I worse than that stupid wallet? The thief didn't even steal from me. Milo nodded helplessly. With your size, the thief couldn't have done it, Randy said with a smile. Milo sighed. Speaking of which, I feel a little sorry for that man. The most worthless thing I have on me is that wallet. Ever since there was a hole in it last year, I've been treating it as an ornament. Although there are many things stuffed inside, they're all light and small balls of yarn that are sewn directly into the wallet. Randy raised his eyebrows slightly. That thief who took a huge risk would probably break down after opening the wallet. However, when he thought about how Milo actually had to use a fake wallet to decorate his store, the middle-aged man's difficulties were deeply reflected at this moment. He couldn't help but think of the time when he often couldn't get his royalties. Even though there were only a few copper coins left in the wallet, he still had to stuff a handful of broken stones inside so that those beautiful ladies could take a second look at his hanging wallet and bloated crotch. Let the unhappy things go. Anyway, we didn't lose anything. Think of something happy, Randy said with a smile. Then why don't we talk about how you got this enviable job? I also want to live a life where I have to worry about which house to go to first to collect rent when I wake up every day. Milo looked at Randy seriously. Garland also looked at Randy with great interest. While he was at it, he casually touched his budding hair and became more confident. It's a little complicated, Randy muttered. Then let's start with how to become friends with a lady. That's easy. You just go up and confess, Randy answered. That's it. Milo didn't believe it. Yes. When most girls reject, they will say, you're a good person, but we're not suitable. Let's just be friends. Milo nodded. You see, although we didn't confess successfully, we achieved our goal of making friends. I see. I've learned it. Milo nodded with a look of realization. Then, do you usually make friends with girls like this? Milo asked again. Randy shook his head. No, I usually don't make friends with girls. I like older ones who are sensible, live well, and not clingy. Oh. Milo didn't seem to understand, but he still nodded. TSK. Young people nowadays, you have to think carefully. Garland shook his head, looking like he couldn't continue listening. What do you think, Brother Garland? Randy asked with a smile. Great minds think alike. Garland immediately gave him a thumbs up, showing an expression that said, I understand too. Hee. The two of them looked at each other and laughed. Chapter 1925. Mr. Mac, when will Master Old Sim's rum be released again? It's okay if it's a little expensive. I'm really craving it, the old accountant, Christopher, softly asked Meg when he entered the restaurant during the lunch service. The customers in the line who liked rum also pricked up their ears. Mamie Restaurant's rum had been out of service for a very long time. However, Master Old Sim had already passed away, so if they wanted to drink the rum that he brewed, there would be no supply even if they had the money. We don't have rum now, but we should have it soon. I've already reached an agreement with Master Old Sim's only successor, his granddaughter, Master Hannah. She's setting up the first distillery in Chaos City, and the first batch of rum produced will be specially supplied to Mamie's. We'll use the rum that Master Old Sim had stored in his cellar for 50 years as the base liquor. I believe it won't disappoint everyone, Meg said with a smile. He had even made an appointment with Hannah in the afternoon to help her install the brewing machine. As long as the machine was running, the distillery would be able to start production immediately, and there would naturally be rum. Master Hannah is actually in Chaos City? Christopher was shocked. As an experienced rum lover, he naturally knew that after Master Old Sim passed away, his granddaughter became his successor and was very famous in the Fog tribe. Yes. Anyway, everyone will be able to drink rum at Mamie's again soon. Perhaps we can even buy bottled rum outside very soon, Meg said with a nod with a smile. All right. Christopher nodded happily and quickly walked into the restaurant. He had already decided to call his drinking buddies over in a few days to taste rum together. Hannah was already standing at the door when the lunch service ended. She looked at Meg expectantly and asked, "Boss, do you want to rest for a while?" "You obviously don't want me to rest at all," Meg said with pursed lips as he removed his apron and hung it at the side. "Even if that's the case, you have to be a little more courteous." Hannah blinked and urged, "Then let's set off quickly. There are so many parts, and we might not be able to assemble them all by this afternoon. Wait for me to change my clothes." Meg went upstairs and changed into casual clothes. Then, he pushed the bicycle and went out with Hannah. All the machine parts had been sent to the brewery. Now, only Meg, the chief instructor, was left to direct the assembly work. "Boss, do you think it'll work this time?" Hannah sat on the back seat of the bicycle. She was a little nervous, but also a little expectant. "Hard to say." Meg shook his head slightly. "I can't be sure if I can light it up in one go. Luck is sometimes very important." The steam locomotive had to go through several months of hard work from countless engineers and designers before it was finally able to operate successfully. Hannah and the others only had a small blacksmith shop and a drawing dog that didn't understand much. Even he didn't dare to believe that they had a 100% success rate. When they arrived, Hannah had already jumped out of the back seat and skipped toward the production workshop. Meg followed him into the workshop. Mabai and Lulu had already arranged all the parts according to the assembly order. Looking at the two of them sweating profusely, they must have put in a lot of effort and thought. "Mr. Mac, you're here." Mabai looked at Meg and Hannah and laughed heartily. "You've worked hard. You must have spent a lot of time arranging so many parts," Meg said with a smile. "The time spent arranging them is nothing compared to the time spent forging these things. Moreover, arranging them one by one gives me a sense of accomplishment." Mabai shook his head. Looking at the various parts that filled the entire workshop, his smile was filled with gratification. "Then you guys take a rest first. I'll check the parts first. After confirming that there are no mistakes, we'll start the assembly." Meg didn't waste any more time and began to check the parts. He was the one who came up with the design draft. With his excellent memory, he didn't even need to look at the blueprint and began to inspect it with his naked eyes. There was no need to talk about Mabai's craftsmanship. They followed his instructions strictly, and the quality of the parts this time was very high. It even exceeded Meg's expectations a little. After looking through all the parts, big and small, and correcting a few mistakes in the placement of the parts, the group began the assembly work. This was the first phase of the brewery's project. Although there were many parts, it wasn't to the extent that it was too exaggerated. After the first phase of the project was completed and the machines were confirmed to be stable and workable, it wouldn't be a problem to expand the production on a large scale. There was no need to rush things like brewing wine. The four of them didn't stop for an entire afternoon and finally completed the assembly of all the machines. "It's done," Meg looked at the crisscrossing pipes in the workshop. All kinds of complicated machines were neatly arranged, and the huge beer tanks were standing upright. It looked like a modern brewery. Wow, it's so cool. Hannah wiped the sweat off her face as she looked at the brewery that she had built with her own hands. Her eyes were shining. In comparison, the brewery that he had built in the Falk tribe was simply unbearable to look at. Mr. Mack, you're really a genius, Mabai also praised. Although these parts were all forged by him, he was still amazed when they were pieced together into a machine that finally appeared in such a state. It looks great. Lulu also nodded with a silly smile. Let's do the test tomorrow morning. I have to go back and cook. Meg raised his hand to look at his watch, and then looked at Mabai and Lulu with a smile. Don't line up later, and don't cook. I'll make more for dinner, and I'll get Hannah to bring it over to you. Go back and have a good rest. I won't stand on ceremony with such a good thing, Mabai said with a smile. Lulu touched her head with a silly smile and didn't reject either. Meg got on his bicycle and went back to the restaurant first. For dinner, he cooked a few more dishes for Mabai, Lulu, and Cece. He also made a bowl of chicken soup for Cece and got Hannah to bring it over to them. At the dining table, Yabamiya looked at Hannah curiously and asked, So, Hannah, is your brewery going to start up soon? Yes. If there's no problem with the test tomorrow, I want to start right away. Hannah nodded with an expectant smile and said, I haven't brewed wine for a very, very long time. I'm afraid I'll be rusty. A new factory, new machines, and even some new processes. You'll probably need some time to get used to it, Meg said calmly as he dealt a small blow to Hannah. It's okay. It was much more difficult when I was building my own machines. Hannah grinned and didn't care at all. I'll make it up to you tomorrow. Can't you guys post this chapter? I can. Ha ha. End of chapter. Chapter 1926. In a room in a small courtyard in the city, Lord's castle. Your Highness, the Black Falcons are all here, a man in black said respectfully to Sean, who was sitting at the table. Sean looked at that man coldly and said, You have only 3 days. Find that child or die. Yes. The man replied hurriedly as his body trembled. After a while, that man said, But, Your Highness, if we do this, won't we anger Alex? I'm worried that he'll do something to you. He and I are already irreconcilable. Only by capturing his child can we truly control or kill him. A murderous look flashed across Sean's eyes. If it weren't for Josh, that useless piece of trash, he would have died 3 years ago. None of this would have happened. Yes. The man in black's face stiffened, and he didn't dare to say anything else. He bowed and left. Soon, in an inconspicuous, dilapidated courtyard in the slums in the north of the city, a dozen or so men in black disappeared into the night. And in Chaos City, there were countless black-robed men traversing through the night like wolves searching for their targets. They had received a unified order to find a 3-year-old child, a half-elf. You have to pay. Otherwise, Amy is super fierce. Amy followed behind Anna and spoke in an old-fashioned tone to the demons who were a little drunk. You. A demon pointed at Amy and burped. His tone was a little harsh. You're really a little cutie. Come, little boss, here's our money. You can count it. The demon at the same table slapped him to the side and handed a handful of gold coins to Anna with a smile. That demon was stunned by the slap. He spun around twice before coming back to his senses. He looked at Amy and suddenly realized what he had just done. He quickly put on an ugly smile and didn't dare to say anything else. Hello, you spent a total of 28 gold coins. That's 2 extra. Anna took out 2 gold coins and was about to return them to that demon. There's no need for that. Little boss, you guys take the candy and eat it. We'll leave first. The 2 demons picked up their companions and left with light footsteps. What's wrong with you? Even the little boss dares to be so fierce. You scare me to death. After exiting the restaurant, the 2 demons heaved a sigh of relief and reprimanded the demon who had just spoken. I didn't see clearly. I drank too much and my brain isn't very bright. I was thinking that whoever dared to be fierce to us brothers, we should teach them a lesson. The demon scratched his head awkwardly. You'd better drink less in the future. Otherwise, we might lose the right to enter Mamie's someday. That's worse than not being able to go to a brothel." The three demons muttered as they left, and the topic quickly turned to visiting the brothel. Hee, I earned another gold coin. Amy carefully put her gold coin into her pocket and patted her pocket to make sure it wouldn't fall out. Then, the smile on her face grew even brighter. "This one is yours. You have to keep it yourself. Father said that if you earn money with your own ability, it's yours." Seeing that Anna was about to put the gold coin back into the small money box, Amy quickly stopped her and helped her put the gold coin back into her pocket. "But this is already the 8th gold coin today. Isn't it too much?" Anna whispered to Amy a little embarrassedly. "It's okay. This means that we're cute and have good service," Amy said with a pout. Anna was amused by Amy's appearance. When she heard that someone was paying the bill, she quickly walked over with the small money box. Amy followed behind her unhurriedly. If it was a kind customer, she would show an obedient and cute smile. If it was a bad-tempered customer, she would give a fierce warning. As for those rude and unreasonable customers, they hadn't appeared for a long time. Now, most of the customers knew that Amy's had a fierce little boss who had won the Magic Caster Tournament in the Roth Empire. Little boss is really fierce. I saw her send a 150 kilograms demon flying with one punch last time. That demon couldn't even resist. The customer at the next table paid the bill and didn't forget to gossip on his way out. However, most of the customers were willing to tip Amy and Anna. The two little elves were like two sisters. One was obedient and delicate, while the other was silly and cute. Just a little act of cuteness was enough to make people want to empty their wallets to buy sweets for them. After a night, the two little elven sisters in charge of the cashier could basically fill 2 small pockets with tips of more than 1,000 copper coins. This was also the source of Amy's motivation to go to work every day. Although she already had a net worth of hundreds of millions, the income from labor made her happier. "Tomorrow, I'll treat you and Big Sister and a dried fish. The kind where each of you gets 10 pieces, Amy said to Anna. Anna thought for a while and said, "Then I'll treat you to deep-fried chicken drumsticks. The kind where each of you gets 3 pieces. See, now that you have money, you have more confidence in your words. Goodbye, boss, little boss." After the opening hours, the ladies bade farewell and left after having a simple but sumptuous supper. Meg reached out to pull the wooden door back. Just as the door was about to close, his gaze landed on a tree in the square in the distance. His eyesight was very good. With the help of the moonlight, he saw a black shadow curled up on the treetop, looking in the direction of the restaurant sneakily. "Father, aren't you going upstairs?" Amy asked Meg, who was still standing at the door, with Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Let's go upstairs to wash up and get ready for bed." Meg closed the door and locked it before walking towards the 2 children with a smile. After telling them a long story, Meg finally coaxed the 2 children to sleep. Then, he turned off the lights and went out quietly. "It seems like a few fellows have their eyes on us." As soon as Meg went out, Irina's voice sounded from behind him. "They should be Sean's men. He's got guts, but I'm a little curious. How did he find us?" Meg turned back to look at Irina, who was standing by the window, and said with a smile, "He should just be a little suspicious. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a few small shrimps following us." Irina turned back to look at Meg with an interested expression. "Do you want to exercise before bed?" Meg looked at her, who had just finished showering. Her long hair was casually let down, and her thin gauze dress was faintly visible. A faint fragrance wafted over, and the atmosphere was a little more seductive. "Do you want to take a shower too?" Meg asked tentatively. "You can take a shower when you come back. It's just a few small shrimps." Irina put on a thin jacket and waved at Meg. "I see. Okay." Meg felt a little disappointed for some reason. Chapter 1927. The night was getting darker. Many shops in the Aden Square had already closed for the day, and the square was completely silent. Under a big tree, several people dressed in night clothes were meeting. "Captain, according to our investigation, the owner of this restaurant has a 3-year-old daughter. She's a half-elf," one of the men in black said softly. The The square-faced leader waved his hand and said decisively, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's capture her now." They had been ordered to find the 3.5-year-old half-elf within 3 days. Before they had any concrete information, they were not to let go of anyone suspicious. But this little girl's identity is a little special. She's the disciple of Crassus and Julian. She even won the Magic Caster tournament a few days ago. Her strength is above the 7th tier, the man in black said quickly. What? A 3-year-old 7th tier magic caster? The square-faced man in black opened his eyes wide. Although the other men in black had their faces covered, the shock in their eyes could be seen. She defeated an 8th tier magic caster and won the Magic Caster tournament, the man in black said, swallowing his saliva. The scene suddenly fell into silence. The men in black looked at the square-faced leader. The square-faced leader's expression was a little awkward. Fortunately, the black scarf covered most of his face. Although he was very good at stealth, he was still only a 7th tier knight. It was really hard to accept that he couldn't defeat a 3-year-old child. Also, Julian lives in a magic potion shop next door. If we make a big commotion, we may disturb him. The man in black added. Captain, she dares to appear in Rendezvous and participate in the tournament in front of the king and everyone. There's no news of her being related to Alex. She's definitely not our target. Julian is the Lord of Frost, a 10th tier ice magic caster. He's famous for his eccentric temper. If we provoke him and cause our plan to fail, I'm afraid we won't have a good ending. Captain, why don't we change our target? The men in black began to persuade their captain to calm down. What you said is reasonable. I also don't think she can be the target. How can Alex open a restaurant as a chef? Unless he sells braised dragon heads. The square-faced leader nodded and said, It's not because I can't beat her that I'm not going. This is related to His Highness' plan. All the black-clothed men nodded, although they were all emotionless killers. But he was still afraid of death. Just this? Meg and Irina were standing on top of a tree, not far away. They looked at the men in black, who were quietly retreating with strange expressions. It seems that your infiltration was very successful. Anyone with a normal brain wouldn't have thought that you would become a chef, and a chef with amazing culinary skills, Irina said to Meg with a smile. Talent is not something that I can decide. Meg sighed, his eyes looking at the sky at a 45-degree angle with a hint of melancholy. Let's go. Let's follow them and see what they want to do. Irina jumped lightly and floated to another tree about 10 meters away. Meg couldn't fly. As a player who dealt pure physical damage, he could jump more than 10 meters, but he couldn't be as graceful and light as Irina. He could only fall to the tree branch and jump between the trees. From the conversation, these guys were obviously after Amy, and they belonged to Sean. As for why Amy was the target, the assassination on the rainy night 3 years ago had explained everything. If Alex had a weakness, it wasn't Irina, who was equally strong, but his daughter, who he swore to protect with his life. A half-elf less than 4 years old should be very weak and easy to control. As long as they could catch her, Alex's lifeline would be in their hands. Their train of thought was right. It was like this 3 years ago, and it was still the same now. Amy was still Meg's biggest weakness, but this time he wouldn't let anyone hurt her. The stealth skills of the men in black were very clever. It was obvious that Sean had spent a lot of effort to train this group of personal guards. But skill was not worth mentioning in the face of strength. Meg and the others followed them at a distance and stopped outside a small courtyard in the south of the city. Target confirmed. Confirmed. A family of 3, an ordinary human, a first-level elf, and a 3.5-year-old half-elf. All of them are asleep. Kill the human and elf, and take the child away. A cold light flashed in the square-faced leader's eyes. The 3 men in black jumped up and landed in the courtyard. The sharp broken blade was unsheathed, reflecting the cold moonlight as it gently opened the door. Just as they were about to reach out and push the wooden door open, a gust of wind suddenly blew in the courtyard, rolling up the sand and fallen leaves. The men in black subconsciously raised their hands to cover their eyes. All of you deserve to die. An incomparably cold voice rang in their ears. The expressions of the men in black changed, and they all gripped their weapons tightly as they looked around. But before they could do anything, the falling leaves in the wind had already slit their throats, and they only had time to let out a low, muffled sound. "What's the situation?" The square-faced leader heard the muffled sound in the courtyard, and his face darkened. He was about to climb over the wall. Just then, a hand appeared on his shoulder, and a low voice sounded in his ears. "They're all dead." "Yeah, Alex." The square-faced man in black froze, and his body and mind went cold. "How many people did Sean send to do this in Chaos City?" Meg asked coldly. The square-faced man in black didn't dare to turn his head, but he knew that there was no way he could survive in Alex's hands. He immediately sneered and said, "Since you're here, the daughter might already be dead. If you let me go, I can help you find her. What I want to know is where your nest is and how many scumbags like you are in Chaos City now." Meg stepped on the square-faced man's foot. Accompanied by the sound of bones breaking and the man in black screams, the front half of his left foot had already turned into a pile of meat and bone. Big and small drops of sweat were flowing out of the man in black's forehead, and the extreme pain almost made him faint. "Where else?" Meg's devilish voice sounded again. I will never—" Crack, crack. Meg broke his left hand into 18 pieces. "Kill me. I'll tell you everything." The black-robed man finally broke down and spilled the beans about their hideout in Chaos City. As for how many people were operating in Chaos City, that was not something he could know. "I hope you didn't make up the address, or I'll make you regret being born in this world." Meg knocked out all of his teeth with a punch and also removed the poison hidden in his teeth. He carried him with one hand and headed north of the city with Irina, who had cleaned up the scene. Chapter 1928. Meg could totally understand Irina's anger. These guys' target was Amy, but they didn't know what Amy looked like or where she was hiding. So they chose to try their luck and capture all the half-elves around the age of 3.5 in Chaos City. They also killed everything that could affect their plan, such as the parents of these half-elves. This meant that many half-elves might lose their parents tonight. Meg knew how shrewd Sean was. He was even more shrewd than Josh, and as the commander of the border army, his murderous aura was more intense than Josh's, and his methods were also more vicious. Soon, Meg and the others came to a courtyard in the north of the city. It's here," the square-faced man in black said weakly. The pain that came from his body made him almost unable to speak. The torment of not being able to live and not being able to die had already caused his will to collapse. "There are 3 people left behind. There's a cellar, and there are 4 children inside." Irina narrowed her eyes slightly, and then turned to look at Meg. She calmly said, "I want to kill." This was not a request, but a very calm statement. Meg had no reason to refuse. These 4 children meant that 4 innocent couples might be killed, and half of them were elves. Those children became orphans just because they were about the same age as Amy. Meg twisted the neck of the man in black in his hand and casually threw him into the courtyard. He nodded slightly and said, "They do deserve to die." The sound of the corpse falling into the courtyard attracted the attention of the men in black who were left behind. But before they could do anything, they were suppressed by a terrifying aura and were unable to move. Irina and Meg landed in the courtyard and pulled out the 3 men in black who were hiding in various places. When they saw Irina, there was already fear in the eyes of these men in black. It was just that their bodies were no longer under their control, and they couldn't even kill themselves. "Where are the others?" Irina asked coldly. "Kill us," one of the men in black said with difficulty, with a fierce look on his face. Bam! A wooden chair exploded on his head, and brain matter and blood splattered on the faces of the 2 men in black next to him. There was some fear in the eyes of the 2 men in black. Although they had undergone professional training, the fear of death was instinctive. "Where are the others?" Irina looked at the 2 men in black and asked again. We don't know," one of the men in black said with a fearful voice. Uffed! The broken and rough wooden handle pierced his eyes, and he screamed immediately. "You don't know either?" Irina asked coldly as she looked at the last man in black. They went to capture those half-elves according to the list. The man in black said with a trembling voice. Where's the name list? Mag asked. It's. The black-clothed man gained some space to move. His trembling hand reached into his bosom and suddenly sped up. He pulled out a red iron ball and threw it into the air. However, he was underestimating Meg and Irina by playing tricks in front of two 10th rank experts. The moment he threw the metal ball, the kitchen knife flashed and cut it into countless metal pieces. The light that flashed was also cut by the kitchen knife. Irina stomped him into the ground and walked toward the cellar. Meg finished off the man in black, who was still screaming, and followed Irina to the cellar. Mother! Mother! The secret cellar was opened, and the children's cries came from the dark cellar. Irina paused in her footsteps and hesitated for a moment. Then, a ball of warm light appeared on her fingertips and slowly descended into the cellar. She also jumped in. The cellar was dark and damp, and seemed to have been dug recently. The passage was only big enough for one person to pass through, and it was more than 5 meters deep. After entering the ground, it suddenly became wider. It was like a smaller version of an underground prison. The only difference was that the cages here were small. They were stacked on top of each other, like small dog cages. In the small cages in the corner, there were already children in 4 of them. Hearing the noise, the crying of the children suddenly stopped. They curled up in the corner, shivering. They didn't even dare to sob. The wounds on their dirty and tattered clothes could be seen. Mag only took a glance at it, and his heart was already burning with rage. These children were about the same age as AI me, but they had suffered such an undeserved calamity. They had been captured here and subjected to inhumane torture. Irina waved her hand to remove the chains on the door and opened the iron chains of the cages. The soft light illuminated the small cages. Children, don't be afraid. I've beaten the bad guys away. I'm here to take you home, Irina said gently to the children in the cages. The soft light and gentle voice made the children muster up the courage to look outside. After a slight hesitation, they ran out of the cages and threw themselves into Irina's arms, crying. All right, it's fine now. I'll take you home. Irina comforted them softly. She used life magic to heal their injuries and put them to sleep. What should we do now? Irina asked Meg. Send out all the night elves above level 5 to protect the half-elves in the city. Meg looked at the children sleeping peacefully, and his voice turned cold. I'll go find Sean. I'll go with you. Irina got up. Meg shook his head. No, you should go protect them. You can find those men in black quickly. The more groups you find, the fewer tragedies there will be. Irina pondered for a moment before nodding. Slash him one more time for me. All right. Meg nodded and turned to leave the cellar. Meg didn't go straight to the city lord's castle. Instead, he went to the textile factory not far away. Ozzy, who had recently moved to the textile factory from outside the city, sensed something and quickly flew out. Ozzy, go to the city lord's castle, Meg said coldly as he flipped onto Ozzy's back. Ozzy flapped its wings and flew towards the city lord's castle at a low altitude. The joint investigation was not over yet. As the representative of the Roth Empire, Sean was staying in a residence arranged by the city lord's castle. It was also the safest place in the whole of Chaos City. Sean, come out and face your death. The purple-striped griffin hovered above the city lord's castle. Meg raised his sword and shouted. His thunderous voice resounded in the city lord's castle. There was a commotion below. In a courtyard, Sean walked out in soft armor, surrounded by a few 10th-tier powerhouses. He looked at Meg, who was sitting on the griffin, and frowned. Alex, the enemy is right in front of us. Why are you picking a fight? Chapter 1929. Meg's furious roar woke everyone in the city lord's castle up. The representatives sent by the various races to investigate the Great Old One incident had yet to leave, and were also staying in the guest area. They all came out when they heard the commotion, and wanted to see why Alex came to look for Sean in the middle of the night in a rage. However, When they saw Meg standing on the griffin's back, the powerhouses of the various races had different expressions. They had long heard that Alex might have already stepped into the legendary realm, but he had restrained his aura when they saw him yesterday, so no one felt anything special about him. However, the current Alex was like a sharp sword standing on the griffin's back. His terrifying aura made them, who were also 10th-tier powerhouses, fearful. No wonder he could kill Weston with a flying sword. Alex might have really stepped into the legendary realm and become the most powerful person on the Norland continent, the goblin representative said with a sigh. Although the powerhouses of the various races did not say anything, they had no objections to the goblin representative's deduction. What's going on now? Why did Alex come here in the middle of the night for no reason? Michael pushed open the window of the study and looked in the direction of the guest area. He frowned and hurried out in that direction again. The peace conference was imminent, and there was still no clue about the devil's escape from the seal. They could not afford to have any more trouble now. The 10th-tier knights and magic casters protecting Sean looked at Meg with extremely grave expressions. Their hands were already on their long swords, and their magic caster staffs were also raised high. They even started to chant the guiding incantation silently. After Josh's ear was sliced off with a sword, they no longer dared to have any misjudgments or fantasies about Alex. He was no longer the great general of the Roth Empire. If he dared to slice off Josh's ear and threaten him with death in front of everyone, then he would dare to do the same thing to Sean. Among the 10th-tier knights, a few were from the military and had more or less interacted with Alex before. However, the current Alex gave them the feeling that he was even more invincible. Even if they had 4 10th-tier knights and 2 10th-tier great magic casters, they still could not guarantee that they could stop him. Sean looked at Meg and frowned. He could guess the reason for Alex's anger, but he was thinking about whether his men had succeeded in capturing Alex's daughter. Otherwise, why would Alex be so furious and even directly kill his way to the City Lord's mansion? This was the City Lord's castle of Chaos City. He was the representative of the Roth Empire, and also the first prince of the Roth Empire. He was the prince who was most likely to become the future king of the Roth Empire. Chaos City definitely wouldn't sit back and watch Alex make a move on him. Thinking of this, his heart calmed down a little. Sean looked at Meg and solemnly said, "Alex, you were originally the Northwestern General of the Roth Empire. Before I came, Royal Father even asked me to." Looking at Sean's face, Meg couldn't help but think of the 4 pitiful half-elf girls in the cellar. Yet, he was still here pretending that nothing had happened, and still wanted to play the old friendship card with him. Bullshit! Meg roared angrily and pulled out the Tion-Du sword on his back. Lightning flashed across the surface of the Tion-Du sword and let out a thunderous roar. Meg took a step forward and turned into a shadow and instantly appeared in front of Sean and the rest. "Protect His Highness." The knight standing at the front of the group let out an angry roar and took a step forward to stand in front of Shaolin. He drew his long sword from its scabbard and slashed forward with a solemn expression. A red sword projection stretched out for 7 feet and rippled through the void. 2 knights dashed forward from the side and also unsheathed their long swords to stab Meg. The last knight stood in front of Sean with his sword and was not in a hurry to go forward. At the same time, the 2 great magic casters had finished channeling their magic. A water domain enveloped Meg and slowed him down. At the same time, the ground wriggled, and a pair of giant stone hands reached out from the ground to grab Meg's feet. In the blink of an eye, Sean's bodyguards had already reacted. 6 10th-tier powerhouses attacked Meg at the same time. Moreover, they cooperated well, and their methods complemented each other. Obviously, they had practiced the joint attack in advance just to deal with Alex. All the powerhouses from the various races widened their eyes. They all wanted to see how strong Alex was now, and whether he could break out of the encirclement in the face of 6 10th-tier powerhouses. Sean took a step back and also looked at Alex coldly. These 6 10th-tier powerhouses were carefully selected by the king and designed a joint attack for them. Although they had only been working together for a short time, it should not be a problem for them to protect one person. Sean was very clear that the purpose of his trip was not only to investigate the Devil's incident, but also to have two more important missions. One was to find out Alex's weakness, and the other was to test Alex's strength. If he could not even break through a six-man battle formation that he had not familiarized himself with, then his threat would become insignificant. There were more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses guarding the Roth Empire's royal palace at all times, not to mention the backup plans that the king had left behind. Even if Alex really became a god, there would still be a limit. The joint attack had already been formed, and Sean's lips curled into a mocking smile. Although Alex had become stronger, he still could not change his arrogant character of underestimating his enemies back then, and stepped into the trap that was prepared for him so easily. The appearance of the water domain made Meg feel as if he had sunk into the deep sea instantly. The terrifying pressure and substantial heaviness made Meg's speed drop significantly. The giant rock hands under the ground had already started to close and were about to grab his feet. At the same time, the long swords coming from three directions were also showing their sharpness. That's it. There was no trace of panic on Meg's face. Instead, he smiled contemptuously and then raised his sword to slash forward. The water domain was slashed open by the sword and shattered instantly. Meg's slightly stagnant body suddenly sped up, and he stepped over that giant rock hand that was flashing with black light. He flipped his long sword and held it horizontally in front of him. Lightning flashed, accompanied by a loud clap of thunder, and swept forward like a huge stone slab. The three knights who were thrusting their swords over had a change of expression. However, the momentum of their swords had already disappeared, and they had no way to retreat. They could only brace themselves and stab at that giant longsword that was sweeping towards them. Bam! With a dull thud, the three of them felt a terrifying force coming from a sword. The longsword bent into a terrifying arc and then broke completely. The broad, long sword returned and slapped the three of them away with a backhand. The front was instantly emptied, leaving only a level 10 knight with a shocked expression, and Sean, whose expression had changed greatly. The knight drew his sword. Meg also drew his sword. The long sword broke. The knight slowly knelt on the ground with the heavy sword on his shoulder, spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell to the ground unconscious. Sean wanted to retreat, but the heavy sword had already been raised and pointed at his throat. Sean's half-step back froze in an instant. The remaining two great mage's incantations also suddenly stopped. Within the range of the sword, it was Alex's absolute domain. No one could be faster than him. In a chapter that you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.